Comes the money.
Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, 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 money.
Dollar, dollar. Dollar, dollar. Ching, ching, bling, bling. Cut the chatter. You ain't talking money, then you're talking no matter. Bonus track, bonus track.
That will cost you extra. See you later, sucker.
You know, the guy in the booth who's talking to you on a tiny little earphone, he's afraid the guys at network are going to tell him it's through if he lets the guy keep talking like I'm talking to you. Because the corporation's got the networks and they get to say who gets to talk about the country and who's crazy today. I would cut to a commercial if you still want this job. Because you may not be back tomorrow with this corporate mob. Cut to a commercial.
Okay, flush him.
Cut the commercial. Cut the commercial. Cut the commercial. Cut the commercial. Okay.
Hello and welcome to a special unadvertised bonus track edition of Ticket Stubs. I'm Kyle.
I'm Levi.
And here we are to discuss one of the great men of literature, one of the great men of letters. You know, there's a long time I thought, like, to describe somebody as a man of letters meant like, oh, they write many letters in their office and send them out, which is of course part of it, but it's like your stock and trade is letters that you use to write. Levi's a man of letters himself. I'm a appreciator of letters. But to celebrate the great novelist, raconteur, much mythologized, probably the most mythologized writer in modern life.
Yeah, Clive Cussler is who you're talking about.
No, of course, Thomas Pynchon.
Thomas Ruggles Pynchon Jr.
Yeah, so Levi had the idea to do this bonus track episode of Ticket Stubs for a while.
Yeah, which, just to be clear, and you've seen it in the title, I'm guessing we're calling this the Year of the Ruggles.
Yeah, I know earlier in the year, I think we kind of made the comment in jest. It's like, it seemed like Pynchon's kind of having a moment. Right. Obviously, you know, if you time travel back to this time a year ago, we knew that One Battle After Another, which I don't even think did we know that was the name? I know the Battle of Bacton Cross was the name.
I don't actually remember when the name One Battle After Another was chosen. I feel like,
I think it was
because
this year,
I don't remember if we ever talked about this on air in any podcast form, but when Anderson said, I guess I'm going to have to start figuring out how to talk about this movie. It's like, okay, and it was just like, what?
But we knew this movie had been. I don't think it was confirmed until a little later, but there was a lot of speculation that it's an adaptation of Vineland. Mm-hmm. And of course, it is of sorts, and we're going to talk about that later with One Battle After Another. But this time last year, we had no idea that there was going to be a Pynchon novel that was going to be released in 2025. So, of course, Shadow Ticket was in October.
Yeah, so I think that was announced in like February or March, sometime early in the year.
Honestly, and it's one of the last seminal memories I have of living back at home with y'all before I got married and moved away was the morning of waking up to that news on Twitter that there is going to be a new Thomas Pynchon novel and the name of it and what it was about. I
remember you came and woke me up and was like, so there's a new Thomas Pynchon novel here, and I was just like, what?
He's had a bit of a moment this year, which is, you know, Levi and I speculated some years back that would he even release another novel, like with Bleeding Edge, was that the end of, you know, his published work? And happily that's not the case, that Shadow Ticket came out this year. So we've already done an episode on Inherent Vice early on. I think that was like our 10th episode. It was pretty early on. And we had a little bit of a discussion about him then. I would be curious, actually, myself, to go back and listen to what we said exactly. I remember some vague ideas about some things we said.
Yeah, as far as about him, you mean, just in general?
Well, that, and then that movie, and specifically the book, and him as a writer, we did talk about a little bit. So, not an exactly movie-centric podcast today, although we will be touching on the movies, of course, through our discussion of One Battle After Another, which we've been kind of intentionally holding back talking about more thoroughly on the podcast because we knew this was coming soon by the end of the year. This is going to slip in just at the end of the year. Baby New Year came with a special...
or rather... Father Time is going out.
There's Father Time. There's Baby New Year.
Yeah, but I'd say Father Time gave us because Baby New Year won't be born when this is put out, more than likely. Now, when you're listening to it, it's probably in July of 2038. So whatever. But,
being played at our trials,
right,
broadcast to the jury. So we're going to talk a little bit about Thomas Pynchon, and I won't even say all that ironic. I feel like in lockstep with us that our very first mutterings or understandings of who he was came with the development of Inherent Vice as a movie. That was the first time we ever really heard about him. Levi, what about what has it been like to be a Pynchon fan in a year where we had not only a new novel that come out from him, but an adaptation of his work as far as just a larger understanding or appreciation of him and the culture, and then maybe just for you and your understanding of him? Many questions thrown in that. Feel free to start wherever.
Well, that's why I thought it was relevant to even do this podcast, was because it felt like, I don't want to say that Pynchon was becoming popular or that people knew about. Obviously, he's quite famous and well known,
especially within literary world. People,
so I'm not going to act like everybody knows who he is now. Obviously, I'm sure there are more people this year who found out about him.
He is a rock star niche figure.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is people who know his name all have an opinion. Even if it's not universally positive, he has such a mighty reputation.
Right.
But if you turn left just a degree, you're going to see a world that has no conception of him. And yet, I think he's obviously been incredibly influential in a lot of things that have filtered into a more mainstream spaces.
Yeah, and I think that I've never heard anybody ever say anything bad about him in an enlightened form, obviously. And I think a lot of people, and I think it's relevant in its own way, wanted to talk about. Obviously, I think, and you would definitely agree with this, and this is almost an obvious statement, that one battle after another has far more to say about the modern day than Shadow Ticket does. Even though I think, even when you didn't as much, the Shadow Ticket had...
We're going to get into talking about all the books, especially Shadow Ticket.
Right. But that with this year, though, trying to go back to those questions you asked.
I try to just, when I come up with these questions, come up with a bunch of vomit ideas, and then you pick up what you want out of it.
And I guess we'll talk about our thoughts on him in general momentarily. And I've been on the record multiple times for saying he's my favorite novelist and writer, and probably the person who's influenced my own work more than anyone else. To its detriment, I'm sure. More not on his part, but I think, though, that his work taps at a particular thing that we and the left in general find important, which is the not only continuation of fascism in America after 1945 or in the world, but especially in an American sense, but kind of the eternity of fascism in its own way too, or the thoughts of power and use of power. You can call it monarchy, you can call it fascism, you can call it whatever, but that
autocracy in general,
and thinking about it in those terms, but also with a very sick sense of glee or whatever. Or also, as he clearly has made evident, and I was telling my kids this here a while back when I was giving them a big lecture about something I believe is that the world is a very dangerous and disgusting and increasingly hostile place, so you need to make your own world out of that. somewhere where you can live and your own refuge in the refuse of our culture and our societies.
One of the most iconic quotes from him to kind of follow up with that is from Gravity's Rainbow, where he's, and I say this is in his prose, but this is, of course, I think one of the central ideas of his entire fiction and certainly worldview from Gravity's Rainbow. If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about answers. Mm-hmm. Which I think summarizes, and I think it's no surprise there's people who have who have done a Mad Men podcast. We have a huge interest in the 1960s. He's kind of one of the quintessential 60s writers. Funny enough, he only put out 2 novels in that era.
Yeah.
But the imprint of that decade and its ideas was something that he was both instrumental in at the time, but also carried forward, I think, in the most direct way with Inherent Vice, of course, where he literally he went back to that time period. But even
Vineland also.
Yeah, Vineland, obviously in a direct way. But he's that very rare thing of like a literary novelist who has, a certain modicum of commercial viability. And what I mean by that is he's not necessarily like the Clive Cusslers of the world or even like a Stephen King or like where everybody who's not even read a Stephen King book knows that name and is synonymous with it. But it's like a more literary, like specific idea of that. But like I said, if anybody who knows that name has all these associations, and another thing about him is too his biography, which I know Levi came across a really good Vulture New York Magazine article about. I remember who the writer of that was.
I'm looking it up. It was called "On the Thomas Pynchon Trail." From the Long Island of his boyhood to the Upper West Side of his new novel, and that was at the time of Bleeding Edge. Boris Kochka wrote that.
Which is, at this point, the most thorough attempt at a biography I've seen in terms of trying to actually track his life.
Yeah.
Because I think, other than his work itself and the ideas, probably the thing he is most synonymous with is his secrecy, his privacy, the fact that there's not a lot of photographs that exist to him. And that whole like mystique and mysteriousness, I think, is added to his literary imprint, not to take away at all from his work itself, because that's, of course, incredible and stands on its own. But that undeniably adds this degree of fascination with him that in its own way is in keeping with what his work is about. This idea of he's like, I'm going to let this speak for myself. But then he's also like poked his head out of the hole and like, he did a little bit of journalism in the 60s, like talking about the Watts riot. Uh-huh. He's done some stuff like, and I know that article that you found mentioned, and I'd read this before. He's written for the New York Times a few times.
He wrote a good review of Love in the Time of Cholera, which is one of my favorite books, and we've talked about that.
He wrote about like the Luddites.
And I've read that.
Then he's got like every once in a while, very rarely, you'll see he's got like a pull quote that's on a book. I remember Mao Tu famously has kind of a praise from him to that.
He was really into that band Lotion. Yeah, which I've listened to quite a bit of. I'm quite a fan of some of the. I found out about him because of him.
It seemed like in the 1990s was when like his myth started to be canonized in a more thorough way between the Simpsons appearances, which I think were the late 90s or early 2000s. I can't quite remember when that was.
Into the 2000s.
The Lotion stuff, the reemergence with Vineland, which then a few years later was followed up with Mason and Dixon. So it's like, he's put out some books again. The John Larroquette Show, which is in and of itself mentioning that show, which I've watched a few episodes of on YouTube because there's no physical media release of it.
Right.
So
which is basically like a Night Court spinoff if you've never heard of it.
But, so like he feels like a character in his books.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is everybody who's interested in literature and a fan of his work, he is the V in V in terms of this figure that everybody's trying to chase and pin down and make some sense out of. And so in that way, he's just kind of an endlessly fascinating figure who now has had at least, at this stage, 2 films that have been adapted from his work with of course, both from Paul Thomas Anderson, Inherent Vice, and with One Battle After Another, which is a loose adaptation of Vineland. So he's this weird figure that always finds these ways to reemerge, which I think it's like there's very few writers who can become famous in the popular culture.
Yeah.
Stephen King is always going to be number one because he's not only his work is really good, but also it's been adapted into so many movies and television shows. And he's one of the few recognizable faces and names where anybody could go, oh, that's Stephen King.
Right.
I know who that is,
Yeah.
even if they're not a huge fan of him. There are a few other figures who like pop up over the years. Like there's a lot of writers have like a moment, I feel like, where they're like, look at them, and then they go away. Like somebody that I'm a huge fan of, like Jonathan Franzen, his moment was like the corrections and the Oprah brouhaha that happened.
Yeah.
Somebody
Gillian
like
Flynn kind of had her moment like 10 years ago.
yeah, we
Or
talked
more.
about her on the Widow's Pod a little
Yeah.
bit. Margaret Hoover, or is that her name? Like that, she's now had all these things adapted.
Or Colleen Hoover.
Colleen Hoover, that's it. That's it. Yeah, Colleen Hoover, and I feel like a lot of this is associated with did my stuff get adapted into movies and TV?
Right.
There was a little bit of one in a much reduced way for Michael Chabon, who's one of my very favorite writers in the early 2000s, right around the time Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay came out. Funny enough, like I kind of retroactively realized, that was the guy that was in Comic Book Superheroes Unmasked documentary.
Well, and also he wrote some screenplay, a couple
Spider-Man
drafts
2,
of Spider-Man 2,
and so he was kind of so like, it's weird. Like it's weird. Books don't matter, as we know, in the same way they did maybe 20, 30, 40 plus years ago. And yet it seems like the publishing...
if you read Gore Vidal that long ago, he's going to say, well, the same thing 30, 40 years ago. So interestingly, it just keeps getting worse. But he was saying what we're saying now then, obviously.
But it seems as though, and I've heard this from multiple places, overall the publishing industry is still kicking. I mean, we go to Barnes & Noble quite a bit. New books are still being sold.
Well, it's probably actually not that difficult to print books in terms of money.
So that's, I think, is both of us as fans of literature, that's a good sign that the book industry still what it is.
Online books never really took real well as far as like ebooks. Audiobooks
are huge.
But it's you're going to want to read it in your hands or you're going to want to hear it.
I do know a few people that do ebooks, but it seems like they're not, as you said, they're not quite as big as what
there was that whole
maybe
moment
expected.
in the early 2010s when the Kindle came out and it was like, this is a big deal that you can read books digitally, and I mean, there were a lot of writers that really worried about that at the time, and like I said, audiobooks are a thing now, so that never really took as an idea with most people, I don't think.
Yeah.
But yeah, because even my mom, our mom got real into that years ago, but now she doesn't even do ebooks anymore. She does audiobooks. So it feels like that was a version of what people wanted, is basically people don't want a lot of books piled up in their house. We can't relate to that, but I'm saying like,
hypothetically it makes sense.
Right.
Like, I mean, practically, if I had this one device, like a little tablet device, that could carry hundreds of books with me wherever I go, of course, that actually sounds like a great idea.
Right.
And yet, as Levi said, not a problem we can relate to, because we'll keep piling up books, no big deal. As you mentioned earlier, you mentioned Gore Vidal's name. Yeah. There was a time and place in the 60s and 70s where like writers were like public intellectuals. They were people who were on talk shows who like, even as late as like the Charlie Rose show in the 90s, like, David Foster Wallace. And there were, even that late, there were people who were like on TV, who were known to talk about their work.
Right, with Norman Mailer.
I was going to say Norman
Kurt
Mailer,
Vonnegut,
Gore Vidal, as you said.
Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac, a lot of those are kind of some older figures, but they spent a lot of time on the talk show circuit or wherever talking about things.
And then I think like you go back a little further, and somebody like Ernest Hemingway, who I love, I think that era was like, there was a little bit more remove of the idea of the right, like the William Faulkners, the Ernest Hemingways, like there was a little bit of a remove of the accessibility, and maybe like now writers feel quote unquote more accessible than ever in a practical way or sense, even though, of course,
yes, but also like they're more accessible, but also people are less interested in them.
well, that's the irony,
right.
as we were saying, is
So what I think you're getting at with all this, maybe to speed it up a little as far as that, is that Pynchon is somebody that maintains all this kind of fandom and interest because he's not giving the people what they want, which is him,
Yeah.
And so therefore he's almost more famous than all those people in the sense of the people everybody knows about him. Like, oh, I want to talk about him. I want to talk about the guy that's mysterious and we don't know what he looks like or whatever. Even though there's been plenty of pictures that have come out in the past 20 years, especially, that have shown, oh, this is what he looks like.
Well, the reason I specifically mentioned Ernest Hemingway is Thomas Pynchon is one of the rare writers who has published something within this year that was literally active at the time of like Hemingway's death, and that reminded me of a Don DeLillo quote. And Don DeLillo's he's probably my second or third favorite writer. He's way up there as well, and he's obviously a contemporary of Pynchon. That I read this quote from him one time, and I'm getting kind of a snippet of it here, that he said he felt like, and he was somebody who was kind of further removed from the writing scene at that particular moment, that it seemed like Hemingway died and then like Pynchon was born in terms of literally the releases when Hemingway died, and then with Pynchon's first book, V.
Because 63, and just to say, Pynchon was born in 37, so that would make Hemingway, because I remember Hemingway was born in 1899. Hemingway would have been, about 38 when Pynchon was born. And like you're saying, that person is still writing books. I mean, I know that that's not that crazy, I guess, and that's a pretty big, it's almost 40-year difference. But that someone is still writing that long after that is just impressive, I guess, in its own way. But
yeah, so I think one of the quotes is, Hemingway died one day and Pynchon was born the next. And then in particular, Don DeLillo said about Pynchon, he, quote, found whispers and apparitions at the edge of modern awareness, but did not lessen our sense of the practicality of American prose, the shotgun vigor, the street humor, the body fluids, the put on. Essentially what DeLillo is identifying there is when the age of Thomas Pynchon really began, which was in those early 60s years, he presented a new sort of sense of humor and exaggerated realism that was like in keeping with that era.
The term that I just found, I feel stupid because I've never heard this before, is hysterical realism, which he is a part of. I think it was coined by some guy named James Wood, who's a critic, about White Teeth, the Zadie Smith novel, which then DeLillo has been put as part of that, Dave Foster Wallace. So it's kind of another term, I guess, for postmodernism. I kind of like the hysterical realism term a little better because I think it's getting at something that is like, I wouldn't say it's magical realism, or obviously that's has its own roots in another whole language of writing, literally of Spanish. And also the work of John Irving, I guess. But I think that with this, with hysterical realism, it's getting at like these very serious ideas that are being dealt with in a more heightened way, but it's not fantasy either, though.
Absurd in some regards, but yeah.
I mean, there are aspects of Against the Day that I would call fantasy.
Science fiction.
But he never went in that full direction. I think it's interesting that DeLillo would compare Hemingway and Pynchon, because I don't really find a whole lot of similarity.
I think he's saying we went from this to this,
and so I think
saying.
that yes, I get that. He's saying that
there
was a transition between that kind of
fiction
to
view
that
of the
kind
world.
of fiction. Right.
Another point there too, I always want to mention his name because he oftentimes kind of gets left off the list, is Terry Southern.
Yeah,
was another writer who was very in tune with what became the 60s sentiment. I mean, Terry Southern was, of course, a writer himself, Red Dirt and Marijuana, which is a good little book. But he was one of the writers of Dr. Strangelove. Easy Rider, of course. And so he was kind of, I think of Terry Southern and Pynchon kind of as those writers who were coming of age around this time who, like, I know we joke about this all the time, particularly when we talk about Mad Men, but I think it's like a interesting thing to mention. of the whole stereotypical concept, and a lot of stereotypes are based in some degree of truth, of the facade is about to crack in the early 60s, which was what was our whole understanding of that decade has been informed by, of course, not only the counterculture, but just the general erosion of trust in institutional, the whole basically the breakdown of the New Deal that had got America through the 30s and the 40s, and by the time we get to the 50s, and that's where V mostly takes place. It's kind of in the 50s,
right?
And it's kind of a slight period piece.
Yeah, in the modern day, I mean, there's all kinds of other sections that are way before all that.
Yeah, right.
Like there's the stuff that's in the Boer War, and it goes far and far.
But anyways,
back,
I think to come back to Pynchon here, he is one of the fundamental writers and authors of the 60s who almost both used it as a social commentary, but also as a playground for ideas. And, of course, he got older. His themes, in many ways, stayed the same, but then sometimes I think for some of his great works, and I mean great works both in terms of their actual quality, but also in terms of the GW great works, like these big mammoth doorstop books, his interest went a little further back in terms of the time periods, but it had that sensibility and interest that was of that time period, So if somebody were to ask you, all right, Levi, who's your favorite writer, and you were to say Thomas Pynchon, and they were to come follow up with the ever elusive one-word question of why? Why?
I think his books hit me at a particular moment, especially Inherent Vice.
That was the first one you read?
Yeah, I don't know where to begin on that, but I think just there's a confidence that his books radiate that I had never read before.
You get the feeling that while you're reading his book, that you're basically taking in the notes and commentary of the smartest person you'll ever read a book from, basically.
And that, no, his stuff doesn't always make sense, and that's not always a good thing either. I'm not going to act like, it don't matter, because I have a lot of conflicting feelings about a book like Gravity's Rainbow. I feel like you feel the same way, but ultimately, the more I think about that book, the better it gets in my mind. But I also know that when I go read it again, I'm going to be frustrated with it.
But it's like you're going into that. It's like a whole
it's a mission.
I got to do that again. But by the end of it, you'll be glad you did it.
I mean, I think probably the first 3 pages of Gravity's Rainbow are maybe some of the best words ever written outside the Bible.
Iconic big opening.
I mean, even the whole first 3 pages especially are just amazing, because I do that as a joke. I go and read it to people and see if you can figure out this. So I've read it enough times now. I do this with middle schoolers, which is even funnier. But I should say I tried to first read that book when I was a sophomore in high school, and obviously didn't do it. It took me until college. I actually finished reading it right before COVID. But I had read Inherent Vice, and then I went and read The Crying of Lot 49. I actually read that I read that by myself, and then a couple years later, I read it for my for summer reading book.
That's like one of the few of his books that have kind of entered high school curriculum
and academia in general,
likely because of its length.
Yeah, and I know it gets taught in college a lot too. But I think his books, they're just like crack to me to read. Even when I was younger, and I felt like, the last time I read Inherent Vice, which was earlier this year, I got obviously the most out of it I've ever gotten. And of course, when I read it when I was, I don't know, I must have been a freshman in high school. Of course, the book didn't totally make all the sense in the world to me, but it piqued my imagination. And there was plenty of neo-noirs and mystery stuff that was after the 1940s and 50s, but that was the first time I'd read a book and really lived in that, and I was more interested in the 60s and 70s, obviously, anyway.
I also had something to say about that time period that I think, as you've pointed out, is even to this day kind of an original idea to make about that time period, which I think is a rare thing to say because you would think in theory about everything's been said about that.
And and we talked about this with Inherent Vice, the movie and the book, is that it's really a hippie love story about somebody who's actually really in love with somebody. And it's
in a
not
time
just,
where love was becoming a cliche concept.
Right, and so I think, and that's kind of what all his books are about in their own way, are about an obsessed person who has no outlet, or the outlet isn't receiving it. And I'm not a person who thinks in paranoid terms all the time. I think that I'm not someone who thinks that everything is out to get us and everything is against us exactly. But also, I mean, I think there are things that are. But I think also, I mean, I try to take things at their simplest first and say, well, this is probably why this is, But then, of course, there's things where I look at it and I'm like, okay, so I'm very selective about that. But I think what appealed to me about him, though, I don't know if I've ever told you about this or not, that there was a period in my life that kind of coincided, I guess, with reading his books. Some of his books when I was in high school was that I used to think about, of course, I didn't think this was true, but it's one of those, like, what do you call kind of paradoxes that in and of itself that can't be proven, and is the idea of kind of like a Truman Show idea where I'm like, what if everyone in the world is, and there's a lot of problems with this, which I'm going to explain in a second, mainly of like not even the mechanics.
As an actor orchestrating my life.
Basically, yes, that like, no, not exactly, it's sort of, it's more just that am I a person, am I the only real person in the world, and everything else is all like fixed to influence me in some way? Now, of course, I want to jump ahead to get to the real point here, which is that's an incredibly selfish and stupid way to view life, which I don't believe that, obviously. I mean, this is the mind of a teenager we're talking about. And that's what I don't like about the Truman Show. I think when I finally watched that movie, I was like, oh, that's stupid. Why is he so special? Why does anybody care about him? Like, and he doesn't feel that way about himself. The movie tries to posit him as this, like, Forrest Gump-esque figure of, like, things just happen to him and he's innocent and it's the people who are watching him who are...
It's ironically, and this is a very 90s thing to say, it's a Jimmy Stewart part played by Jim Carrey.
Right.
And that in of itself is like, and that's not taken away from Jim Carrey's talent as an actor, but it's just like, that is an inherently postmodern conception of story and like of putting an actor like that in a role like that.
Yeah.
And that was a very 90s, you skip to 99, the red pill, the blue pill, wake up to reality versus the predisposed, pre-programmed idea of your life, infinite jestism. I mean, that's a very particularly 90s era, but in some ways was following up on this 60s, 70s eras of that.
Yeah, and I mean,
mode of thought.
my point of bringing all that up, I guess, is that eventually I got out of that and thought, but whenever I would talk to this about people, they would say, well, of course that's stupid. And I'm thinking, well, you've been told to say that, though, so... You know what I'm saying? It's like a paradox that you can't get out of, And I didn't think about that seriously. Like, that wasn't something that, like, ran my life. But that was something, a question that I lived with for probably about 5 years or so.
It's weirdly, it's more comforting than what the reality is, of course.
Yeah,
the reality is, of course,
right.
And I think me and Levi are not atheists or Christians. But, like, the opposite end of that is your life has no meaning. No one will care, period, if you go or you die. And that's like that's a very dark view of but they're incredibly cynical views of humanity. But I feel like we are closer to that reality.
No, and I think that is true. Even regardless, obviously God loves me and loves you and loves everybody and cares about me and my family cares about me and my students care about me. And people I know and friends of mine. And, so I'm not saying that. But ultimately, like, it's kind of a liberating feeling, though, when you are able to
remove yourself
just
from that
shrug and say,
expectation.
I will not matter in the whole, on this side of eternity, Now, of course, if I were to get some of my prose published and I go on some big book tour somewhere and the whole world turns itself back to literature, and I don't think any of these things are going to happen, by the way. But I'm saying it's okay, maybe that'll mean something, Mm-hmm. But obviously, I believe, more importantly, is that obviously you mean more to the people in your life, and that's what you mean. And then you will pass away eventually. And I don't mean literally die, but I mean your memory will pass with other people. I mean, Life of Chuck was about that this year, and we talked about that, I think, at some point. Maybe not.
I don't think we've talked about that.
How great Life of Chuck is.
Yeah.
But that movie's all about, like the lives that people create in their own minds. And then those people in your life exist in your head, and then eventually they will die, or you will die. And
I think there's some people that
could.
could read that whole movie as a Truman Show-esque, oh, it was all really about Chuck's life and all that.
No,
I don't
no.
think so. I think that's a misreading of the story.
No,
but I think that there are breadcrumbs to lead people
right.
to think that.
Yeah, that's his mind, though. That's not a reality. And I think that's what I had trouble with the Truman Show, is I'm like, but like, okay, why was this done to this child? Why is he special? And who cares? I just find that whole movie to be kind of fraudulent as an idea. I think it's a very, like, and I'm getting back to Pynchon in a second on this, because I have a whole
on the Pynchon pod, any digressions
right.
are totally blanketly okay, because that's what his books are all about.
But I'm getting back to that. But that I just find that to be a very, like, teenage cinephile view of greatness. And I love Peter Weir. I mean, we talked about how much we love Fearless. That's like low-key one of the best underrated movies ever made.
Especially the 90s.
Picnic at Hanging Rock is a movie I think about literally all the time.
I'm not as big a fan of it as others, but Dead Poet Society is quite good.
I mean, so I'm very impressed by him. It's not him I'm saying this about necessarily. But just that whole idea of that movie I find to be incredibly fraudulent and very confusing, and honestly more of like a window into the mind of what Jim Carrey must feel like. And he talked about that in the Great Beyond documentary, about how like that movie kind of screwed him up a little bit about the way he views himself, And so I think
I can only imagine if you're famous, that probably is what your life feels like.
And so it's very liberating to then feel, and I mean, any anxious, very neurotic, I'm a very neurotic person. Any neurotic person is going to feel, people are watching me, people are thinking about me, I'm anxious about, what people think or what they say about me behind my back or whatever, But here's the beauty, and so that kind of coincided with me when I was feeling that way about the world, reading Pynchon. And I'm not saying he got me out of this. I think life got, you move on and you realize that everybody, I mean, and also when you watch Margaret, it's literally such a genius quote. It's almost, a lot of people think it's ham-fisted, and you could say that about a lot of,
I know what you're going to say, and I would say, because Kenneth Lonergan's a playwright and he comes from the stage, I don't think it is ham-fisted, because that's the language of the theater, is this quote.
Is it Lonergan? I was trying to remember his name for a second. A lot of people say it's like, okay. But that in Margaret, that Jenny Berlin says, we're not all supporting characters in the story of your life. I think for people to, and I mean, it's a Christian belief, something that I keep coming back to when I read the Bible, is we are here to serve. We're not here to serve ourselves. And so when you let go as much as possible, and it's still, I work on this every day, so I'm not saying I do it. I try, is to just step outside yourself and say, who everybody else. That's more what I want to do, and so that's a very liberating thing to be able to do, is just go, whatever, about my own crap that goes on. And I fail at that about every day, with my own neurotic sensibility. But that I know intrinsically, though, in my like base values, that is true. And so what is liberating now about reading Pynchon is that I feel like he sets up his characters as versions of himself, almost as a dream world version of himself, to say all these terrible big things are going on, but the main character is like a total goof idiot who just like stumbles around through everything and says the only thing that usually matters to those people are sex and having a good time. And that's literally all they want to do. And maybe, especially in his like older self, his more mature literature, care about people every once in a while, or certain people. And I think that when he was a younger person, he got a lot more of the just rowdy, I'm going to have a good time. I mean, you can't end a book like Gravity's Rainbow with a bomb dropping on a movie theater and have the bouncing ball sing-along go on and not think that is literally the metaphor of his entire, especially his first part of his writing career, is to say everything sucks and everything's coming down around us, but let's just have a good time anyway. And that's what all life is about, is having a good time. Now, of course, I think...
And that book came out in the death spiral of Vietnam and Watergate.
Right.
And that's like the moment that book arrives in to echo what you're saying about what it's ultimately
yeah,
is.
and so now, I mean, and then as he gets older with something like Vineland or especially Mason and Dixon onward, Mason and Dixon is very much about look at what these people did and look at how kind of screwed up they were, or how interesting they were. I think those two characters are a lot less kind of rowdy figures than his others. I think a lot of the other people in that book or the supporting characters are more of that. But I think anyway, the point is, I think his books are all about conspiracy, and they're all about people, not exactly innocent people, but like average real people, like
trying to
get
just
get through the web of whatever's going on to get what they want. Mm-hmm. Or that they are obsessed with what's going on, but it's more like, oh, I'm just in it for the love of the game, rather than like what it means. Meanwhile, he also positions the antagonists of his books, or the larger reaching implications, as very, sometimes funny but very serious ideas and themes.
Yeah.
I think he takes serious what the problems in his books are. He just does this really masterful tonal dance of having his very, nonsensical or otherwise goofy or brutish main characters kind of have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. It's like a much funnier version of the ending of Skinamarink, of a child having to like face the ultimate evil and just be like, who are you? What's your name? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't say anything back, but it's like, obviously a funny version of something like that. That's basically what all his books are about. And I find that to be very interesting. And I guess that's why I really love his books. And also just his style of writing has influenced me more than anybody else's. Now, I can't write. I will never be able to write as good as he can, but I find myself when I'm writing, that's the habit I fall into, is his version of prose. Mm-hmm. And obviously mine is a much more easily accessible version of that. But I'd always rather read his version of that, obviously. But I guess that's what I love about Pynchon. If I had to explain to somebody,
that's your answer to
right.
why. I was getting ready to wrap this over. That's your why.
Yeah,
all that
is that his books just I think about things in ways that other books don't. I know that sounds like a dumb way to summarize all that, but about what I think is, his books a lot of his books take place in other places other than the United States, but primarily his books are about America very definitively.
He has a very American perspective.
Right.
Which is anti-establishment.
Right. And I think, some people, it talked a lot in that article we referenced from Vulture about how they were saying, oh, he's very anti-establishment and very anti-capitalist, but he lives in an apartment, yeah. And he lives in a summer home and whatever, which I don't find very interesting or worthy of discussion, other than the fact of that, well, people live, And I think in its own way, that's instructive of Pynchon, the man, is that he's somebody who wants to be the things that he can't be, which I think is something about all of us. But why do you love Pynchon?
I'm not someone all that predisposed towards, in general, being attracted to fantasy stories.
Right.
This is something me and my wife have a difference in, because she's a huge fan of fantasy literature and fantasy movies and storytelling, although there are some examples of some that I like. But I think what I love about his work more than anything else, just to mention his actual style of writing, which you were saying earlier, the sentence starts here and the sentence ends over here, and where you're going to go along that way is usually one of the most exciting, and sometimes it can be frustrating, but I want to lean more on the exciting part of I don't know where this sentence is going to go. Remember someone very close to us referenced reading the first page or so, I remember, of Inherent Vice, and said that, yep, I'm not going to give that a try, or I'm not going to go through that. Which is weirdly, I find, a sign of respect towards the writer.
They meant it more in terms of it was such a good first sentence that they were like, I'm not going to finish. Which
I don't.
I think is,
yeah.
I'm just going to use the word kind of stupid, but I understand what they meant it more in like a positive way.
But anyways, going back to the fantasy storytelling, his books feel like fantasy satires of real life, and what I mean by that is, because we haven't really we've kind of said this here or there, most of his novels end up being historical fiction. They end up being set in these other time periods. Even something like Vineland is released in 1990. The current day parts of the book are in like 1984, which I think is its own perceptive reference to George Orwell's 1984.
Right.
And then the rest of the book's set before that. But like, his books feel like these fantasy portals of reality that, like I said, you're being guided by the hands of a Merlin who is this hilarious, all-knowing stoner. And what I mean by that is, you don't know where it's going. You're not sure if he always knows exactly where the roadmap is, and I think that's mostly by design, as far as on his part as an artist, what that does to the reader. And just the pure imagination in particular of how he views certain time periods and how he places them in the context of not only his worldview, but like the larger scale of where those time periods fit into the general timeline of not only American history but world history. And I just think that he's just the irony is that his books have been turned into two pretty good movies to great movies, and yet he feels as though he's an unadaptable, generally, writer. Yeah. Which I think...
I want to note real quickly here that Gravity's Rainbow was technically kind of adapted into a movie called Impolex by Alex Ross Perry, but just putting that out there. But not totally.
I think, like, I have a huge amount of respect for Stanley Kubrick. He once said that if it can be thought, it can be filmed. And I think that's like the level of confidence he operated on in his career, which we talked about with Eyes Wide Shut. But I think the highest form of any art form, I don't care if it's painting, obviously novels, music, cinema, stage, ultimately is that art, that particular brilliance that is achieved with that particular art form cannot be replicated elsewhere.
Specificity.
And he figured that out with writing and books, I feel like, in literature. Obviously, in a way that kind of sets him apart. Like, I personally actually might like Don DeLillo a little more as a writer, but undeniably, Pynchon has a power that DeLillo has his own power, but Pynchon has this particular gravity. Yeah. Not just through his reputation, but through his work itself that sets him apart as, going back to what DeLillo himself said, is like Hemingway and I love Hemingway. He's one of my top 5 favorite writers, but Hemingway died one day and it seemed as though Pynchon was born the next day. He and DeLillo, Philip Roth, like there's a whole little list. We haven't mentioned Philip Roth at all, and we've not read a lot of his books at this point. But there's a whole little list of writers that came of age in the 60s and 70s that propelled what literature in America was forward. And Pynchon, I feel like he's kind of at the forefront in terms of who pushed that art form further. So
Yeah.
that's not quite as much said with what you said, but and it just also just like when you finish one of his books, even one of the ones that you're not as in love with as the rest, you have this sense of, oh, I climbed a mini mountain. And the brilliant thing about literature is, I think what makes great literature is, for all the flexing about, I read this many books this year, or look at my book talk, or all this stuff. Ultimately, literature is like, that's a whole like subgenre of TikTok.
I immediately know what it is, but
ultimately, the beautiful thing about literature is, among even a lot of other art forms, it's a secret that you just shared with that writer. Mm-hmm. And everything else can be said about this iambic pentameter and this simile. No. Ultimately, great literature is a secret you shared with that writer, and you felt like you had a conversation of sorts with them. And when you read really great books, you feel like you heard the whispers of that person's subconscious. And the subconscious that Pynchon has left behind through his books is unparalleled in terms of its imagination, its wit, it's despair, it's humor, it's everything. And so I think that's why his books have inspired such a fandom, is because they are incredibly dense. And I don't even mean dense in terms of having to have guides tell us what this reference meant or that meant. They're dense because people continue to go back to him because there's so much he gave us in his work. So
that's why I think it's, when people use the term biblical, that's why the Bible is... first of all, the Bible is the Word of God, literally, so it's the most important book ever written. But also, that
people keep going back to it
because there's so much there to look at. And I don't mean even just because it's long. There's I
don't even mean this in a certain way. Even secular Hollywood quotes the Bible routinely because even they're always looking for a hook, an end, a something, Nope, very famously a few years ago, quoted from the Bible in a way that, I think in particular it was looking for one word, which the word is spectacle, which is in keeping with what the themes of that movie were about. Right. But I don't know how to say it. I'll just say it this way: Pynchon, he's just the man when it comes to his generation of writer and what his work has represented.
And I think something we both didn't say exactly, but we skirted around, is that he's a genius who also wants people to understand, or in a way that is like, let me start over.
Make the inaccessible moderately more accessible.
Right, or like just the meaning of high and low art.
Yes.
That
in and of itself was a postmodern 60s thing.
Right. even the stuff with Shadow Ticket, which we'll talk about, we feel is inferior work for him. Still liked a lot of things about it, but even that book had some jokes in it that I was laughing about, like wordplay stuff that I was just like, that's very funny. So, obviously... I
think too, to not over. I don't think you can overstate this. I think for both of us, like when we started to read in a more serious way, he was just like one of those first totems. That you see in the same way that Kubrick was a totem when you get into movies. To mention him again, like Pynchon was a totem of like, if you want to get into serious books, serious literature, this is not the only guy, but like this is an important figure. And then that, I know for both of us, that has then getting into him, and not only getting into him, but rereading those books here and there has expanded our understandings of a lot of other things about other forms of literature or things outside of just him. Even like you said, even his like on reviews, or he wrote an introduction for 1984, which was not in my edition that I read, but I went back and read. Or like you said, Love in the Time of Cholera, like, and that's what a lot of great artists do, is they point to other things that meant something to them and go, hey, by the way, like this is something that, that's what I think an important thing for a modern artist to do, which is to point towards the past and say, this is where I got this idea or this sensibility or just enjoyment even from. So, so So we'll get into talking a little bit now about, in particular, One Battle After Another, which is...
It's funny you said we're going to talk a little bit. I have a feeling we're going to talk
Yeah, probably a lot.
We've been holding this in for a while, so...
So I think this movie in particular represents like a great confluence for Levi and I, not only of being the next Paul Thomas Anderson movie, which he's like... I'll be honest, I'm more and more, it's hard for me to say definitively who's my favorite director. I think out of just like, not out of even frustration, but just out of like, I don't know what to say. I think part of it for me is like, whose work do I revisit the most, and or if I've like I'm imagining 10 marquees with all my favorite current filmmakers and all like marquees of their newest movies. Who am I going to first? And I'm like, probably the PTA movie, just because that's and so. Probably that's a very long-winded way of saying I know he's just your number one.
Yeah,
he's probably my favorite.
I didn't want to like trivialize all of what you said because I think that's important. But I was thinking, yeah, he's just mine. But yeah,
he is, and he's also, and I don't mean this in any way dismissively. He is a film Twitter, to use the term film bro darling for a lot of people, particularly of guys of a certain age, including ourselves and a little older. He's just one of the guy. He's our guy in the same way that previously you had other guys for other generations. But anyways,
yeah.
So there's the new Paul Thomas Anderson movie. The fact that he's working with Leonardo DiCaprio for the first time, that of course also similarly with like DiCaprio, he's one of our very favorite actors, one of the best actors working. And this was not like totally confirmed until fairly late. It was rumor. Yeah. That it was some adaptation of Vineland that he's toyed with over the years. I think he first mentioned being interested in it back in the Inherent Vice days when he was doing press for that. I think he said, I remember hearing an interview here or there where he was like, oh, that's something I'd like to revisit.
Right.
I think he's apparently been developing this movie for 20 plus years. I think back
it was
to the
a
early
combination
2000s.
of various different things that he wanted to make.
It should also be said that I think there are parts of V that were even inspiration for The Master. Mm-hmm. So that's not exactly a Pynchon adaptation, but there is connective tissue there. Yeah. It should be said.
Because it said he had been considering adapting Vineland since the early 2000s, and then he kind of set it aside, and then had different ideas of different movies he wanted to make. Basically, I think he wanted to make an action movie was a big aspect of this, and we can talk about this movie as in that way. But anyway.
So anyways, this movie came with a huge amount of expectations.
Because it was kind of being... Where did it premiere? Or no, it just kind of premiered by itself, didn't it?
I think it just premiered a little bit ahead of the actual biggest
and it was
release.
Getting like these reviews that were like stratospheric. I don't think I'd ever heard a movie talked about in that way ahead of time.
Especially like a mainstream Hollywood release.
Right. It felt like... there's
not a movie that was a festival darling, an independent movie.
Right.
This is made by Warner Brothers.
Yeah, and it was a movie that like we had so much riding on that I never even thought how it would be received. And I didn't even ever think about how I would feel about it. And then it was like, oh my gosh, this is like by far the best movie of the year, blah, blah, blah. Although that and Marty Supreme are now for like, and we just got out of seeing Marty Supreme, by the way. And we're going to talk
literally
about that
just
later.
before we're recording this podcast.
We're not going to talk about that right now. Other than I do want to say about media specificity, the opening credits of that movie are some of the best filmmaking this year. I'm going to talk about another best filmmaking this year in this movie, but that are literally cannot be done except for in cinema. So just put that out there as something that is a great version of media specificity. I don't even want to say exactly what happens, but it's very like, oh, okay. It's kind of like the opening of Uncut Gems in a way, but
yeah.
So yeah, it kind of went back. Now it's going back and forth between people like a ping pong match, literally, as far as like which is the better.
I'm just gonna for the two. About 15 seconds, just say this.
Okay.
Eddington has been left in the dust of these discussions.
Well, it's in Arizona, so New Mexico.
Excuse me,
New Mexico, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
We might put me over the 15 seconds, but that's okay.
Okay.
I think out of those three movies in particular, Eddington is still my number one out of that group.
Yeah, probably.
I think it's. I will say, and I
more
don't.
than Marty Spring.
I think all three. I think all three of these movies are 5-star, best of the year material. So I'm not saying that like one's radically better than the other.
Right.
I think very obviously Eddington is the least cuddly out of these three movies, and that's probably
Really?
a large part. We of course podcast all about Eddington, so I don't want to talk a lot about Eddington here. But
What's wrong with it?
just like,
Was there a problem?
It's the most abrasive.
Right. Oh yeah, definitely.
But for me, this is actually why it's the number one. It's kind of the most abrasive, but also the most outright contemporary out of all those three movies. I mean, One Battle After Another, in theory, is a present day movie. Mm-hmm. But not in the.
It's about a lot of things that are very modern, though. But I mean, I think Eddington is more explicitly modern. But I do think that One Battle After Another is about the world that we are in now.
This can get into a little bit of a discussion about One Battle After Another. There's part of me that thinks One Battle After Another is not exactly. I want to be careful how I say this. Not exactly set in our contemporary reality, in a reality where the French 75 were any kind of movement. If you go back in time for when they were, I think it was like the late 2000s as far as like the earliest portions of the movie, right? It was like the late 2000s.
Yeah, I even almost read it like it was now and then 16 years after now. I mean, I don't know.
That could be true.
Either way, something like that.
But in a reality where a group like Antifa or the Weather Underground had that degree of influence or had a moment like that, and this is not even a criticism of the movie, but I feel like that's not exactly because the use of, like, say, Antifa in Eddington is more of a satirical bent than I feel like what all this is a big way of saying. Ultimately, for all the contemporariness about One Battle After Another, and this speaks to it is an adaptation of Vineland, I feel like, too. It could have been made about a whole host of eras and still had ultimately the emotional like heft above this father-daughter story, daddy-daughter games of sorts.
Right.
It could have taken place actually in a lot of time periods. And again, that's by no means a criticism. It goes without saying, we've said this is by far the most contemporary movie Paul Thomas Anderson has made since, as we know, Punch Drunk Love, in terms of literally a contemporary movie. Eddington is a movie that, like, the simple plot could have been adapted in other time periods, but in its execution, it is an incredibly modern, contemporary movie. This is by no means actually a way of, like, saying one is better than the other. It's just, I think, the thing with Eddington in general is, it is a very angry, non-cuddly movie, and that's kind of where Ari Aster is as a person, too, in terms of the movies he makes and the interests he has. And this is also in keeping with, I would say, really the PTA since, like, Phantom Thread onward, which is a little more cuddly, a little less hard edge. I feel like Inherent Vice is kind of a transition movie between these kind of melancholic epics that are There Will Be Blood and The Master.
Yeah.
I feel like Inherent Vice is a little bit of a transition, and then really, I'd say since, I mean, you go through the movies, Phantom Thread, Licorice Pizza, and then now One Battle After Another, they're much more, I'm a dad now, I've chilled out a little bit. There's not really a parental story
I think
with
you're
Phantom
right
Thread.
about Phantom Thread being in this vein. It's just interesting because that movie isn't a very, very cuddly movie.
It's
either,
not, but it's like it's a love story in its own perverse way.
Yeah. It's still transition into this direction. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
And I think that's what is, like, to me, the thing that ultimately to me speaks about One Battle After Another's ultimate power is the weekend this movie came out on Film Twitter. And I know this sounds like a very niche thing to talk about, but this is the world me and you inhabit in terms of like our understandings of movies in a contemporary way with other film fans online. It just felt like that weekend was this rapturous, beautiful celebration of everybody's like, look at how beautiful this movie is in a very direct way, in a way that might seem very niche ultimately when you think you go out beyond like that community. But that community is
because it made $205 million.
Yeah, I mean,
so,
there's been a lot of discourse about its box office this year, which I don't think we want to dedicate a whole lot of time to. But I think it's a soft success in that department.
I have some things to say about that. We'll talk about later.
But anyways, like when that movie came out, within a community that can hardly ever agree on anything, the love that it got.
Yeah,
I think right there immediately was like, wow, this is something a little different and special. And PTA is a generally loved filmmaker, but nothing is universally beloved I can remember at the time of its release as I've been paying attention to movies in the way that was.
No, I don't even think Marty Supreme has gotten that either, and I think that's partly because people almost worked themselves into hysterics over this movie, rightfully so. But that movie doesn't feel like it's getting quite as much attention.
Well, there's also become, with the Marty Supreme thing, I think there's like a little bit of the beginnings of a Chalamet backlash in terms of how he's promoted this movie that some people had been turned off by.
Why? What are they?
That
We're talking about my son here. About
he's like too extra, too braggadocious. I'm not saying I do either.
Yeah, well,
I'm just
that's
saying
really
like
who the movie character
Well,
is.
I'd say he actually is inhabiting who
right.
Marty Supreme was.
Yeah,
so,
anyway.
as a fictional persona.
Right.
And then we did this, like Film Twitter did the same thing again when the digital releases came out of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we can finally gift this moment. We can meme this moment. It's like whenever that happens.
Well, I took out my phone and took pictures of Lockjaw dead in the chair. So I'm just saying I was already ahead of the curve.
But when you see that level of, and I say this with love, mania.
Yeah.
About like a new movie that's like that, then you know like there's something going on with this as the thing that is connecting with people. And then there was like the 4K, which I think we both pre-ordered.
I haven't yet, but I'm going to.
But then there was a Steelbook 4K that is apparently going to come out, I think, around May. That's after the first 4K. That is going to have even more special features. That sold out.
Crap,
within like a day or two.
Dadgummit.
And because I was going to jump on it and do it, and I got busy and forgot.
eBay will be my friend.
Well, it'll eventually get more
gonna
printings
make more
of them. I'm sure there will. But the fact that happened is like, okay, this is a movie that is connecting. It's a movie that even like the non-movie obsessed people in our lives, I know our parents have seen it, and other people that I've talked to. And even generally amongst like a more casual audience, people are responding to this movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Here's another why question for you, Levi. How or why is this movie, you think, engendering this degree of power and fandom and fascination and love? And maybe you can even start with yourself on that question about what's done for you.
You know how I said Civil War was the best movie since the pandemic? I think this is probably the best movie since the pandemic. Which is also interesting because you don't even think this is necessarily the best movie of the year, what you're telling me.
To that question, I'd still say Beau's Afraid is, to me, as of this moment, still the movie of the decade.
Right, okay.
That's me personally.
However, and I want to say, by the way, maybe we're getting off topic here, but I think it's interesting. This is actually the year where we're gonna, in our rankings of movies, gonna maybe disagree the most. Not that the movies that we have we don't like generally between us, but the ranking is gonna be kind of wildly all over the place compared to like you're gonna rank something like Presence really high, whereas it might not even make mine. And I love that movie. I mean, I also want to say I think this is the best year for movies that we've had probably since 2017. And 2017, I think, is the last great movie year. Like, that was the year where it was like, dang. Like, that many. I mean, we've talked about that before, if you just go through it. I think this year is really high caliber. Because I think it fits both of our versions of what a great movie year is, which is the ones at the top are really great, and then there's a variety of a bunch of other movies too. So it's like, that's kind of both. I can say why this movie's connected with me, and I think by also answering why it's connected with other people, is it's my favorite director making the biggest movie they know how, the most popular movie they know how, in the way they would make a movie. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's literally the perfect distillation of Paul Thomas Anderson makes a blockbuster. This is the movie.
This is, I think what you're saying is this is the closest to him doing a quote, one for them to get the one for me, but the one for him, or one for them, is like still a Paul Thomas Anderson movie. Is what
I think, and I mean, I think that his movies generally appeal to people when they're shown to them. Although I think it's easy to say The Master is going to be a movie that, like, that's going to rock people's boats a little bit and rattle some cages, because that movie's just, and I know that's like literally your favorite movie ever, so I love the movie too. I'm not saying that badly, but that movie's gonna is a poke in the eye, so it kind of stands apart from that. But I just want to reiterate,
I think that the Boogie Nights is subject matter is also
that also is one, but that movie is like wildly popular with a certain segment of male that grew up with that movie in their college years.
I think speaking to what you're saying is like something like There Will Be Blood. It's still considered, it was on a lot of like towards the top, if not at the top of a lot of like best of the quarter century so far lists that we've seen this year.
And I think that's
a movie as insular as that still had the "I drink your milkshake" line that came out of it, and how everybody, even if they're not exactly sure, at least seen that scene in that movie,
I want to say something
that
might implicate me, but I just have to say it. I've showed that movie to my middle schoolers, There Will Be Blood, pretty often. I want to say with a great deal of confidence and honesty, that movie kills. I hate this term, but it's gangbusters. They love it, like universally.
Now, from the outside looking in, I would imagine a lot of people would be surprised to hear that.
Yeah.
Why does it appeal?
Because it's unlike anything they've ever seen. And that's what I was going to say, and we're going to get back to one battle after another in a second. It's still the Pynchon pod, so we're just going to kind of go all over the place. But his movies are very funny. Everybody talks about that. Everybody knows that. But The Will Be Blood is a wildly hilarious movie.
Yeah.
Because I think what you do with that movie, here's a guy, you remember in Euphoria where they're like, how to pass a drug test.
Yeah.
Slide, please, a moment. And I've been watching Euphoria, which I've said on here before, and I'm going to write about that soon. But if you ever want to get middle schoolers to be into There Will Be Blood, here's what you got to do. Number one, you got to not give a crap about the rating. Because the rating doesn't matter in that case.
Let me say, that's a more milquetoast R anyways.
And there are certain parts in the movie, really, there's no cursing in the movie above like a basic cursing. No F words or anything like that.
No sex.
No sex whatsoever. And the violence is very brief but very extreme. And I always tell the kids, I say it every time, I'm like, if you don't want to see this, don't look. But I tell them, I'm like, it's all right, don't worry about it. And I believe that. I wouldn't show that if I thought it was any worse than it is. But you gotta employ
in the Masters for the summer school.
Oh yeah, right, yeah. No, I think you've already lost a lot of credibility with that when he's literally masturbating at the beginning of the movie, and you're like, dang, I couldn't even get 2 minutes into the movie.
The masturbator,
right? Yeah. I mean, he's just doing what he's supposed to.
Yeah.
Drinking jet fuel. Making illicit mermaid sandcastle sculptures. No, that movie's so great. Anyway, sorry, I just want to say one of the funniest scenes in recent memory is oh God, what's his name? W. Earl Brown getting his picture taken.
It wasn't until the last few viewings of that movie I realized that's who that was.
Right.
Yeah,
it's hot.
Yeah,
but you gotta employ the scenes of comedy to them. The milkshake, and then you've got them. But my favorite time ever showing that movie was the scene, and I've seen that movie a lot now since I've shown it, and I'd seen the movie a lot before that. But the first 15 minutes of that movie, unparalleled, as an opening. It's practically a silent movie, basically. I mean, other than the music, but there's a little bit of dialogue, but. there's that one moment where he's on the train and looks down at the young HW and he reaches up and touches his face and this one girl and they went, oh, and I was like, I've got him.
Because
see,
they
that's
bought
what you
in,
got, right? So that's happened multiple times. So I'm like, you got to get them. That's one of those few movies where it works for everybody because it's funny, but also it gets you sucked into this tragedy that plays itself out. And I think he did the same here in a hopeful way. But also, I will say, just last thing about There Will Be Blood and that is in that whole aspect is there have been a couple kids in particular. I remember I showed it to one group and they literally looked at me and said, "I think this is maybe the greatest movie I've ever seen." And they were being dead serious, looking at me like, "I'm so glad you showed me this." You know. And no, I mean it's a movie that's wildly popular amongst teenagers. So therefore, if you can get a middle school group of kids to be into There Will Be Blood, you can get them to do anything, except for actually learn. Now, with this movie, why it works though, I think, is that it is the ultimate version of a Paul Thomas Anderson sensibility in that very big kind of blockbustery way, right? And so for me,
this is the biggest canvas he's operated
right.
on since There Will Be Blood.
And so I guess talking about, and we're kind of going all over the place, but for me, what worked about this movie so much is that I'm trying to think of how to not say this hyperbolically. The first third of this movie, which is basically the introductory part that's 16 years before the bulk of the movie, obviously. Kind of a very long prologue. Contains some of the best filmmaking that I've probably maybe ever seen. Which is followed up by also some of the best filmmaking I've ever seen.
Well, I remember that, especially that first time you see it, it feels like you've not taken a breath for the first 40 minutes. Or about really when you have that jump cut to Chase Infinity in the karate studio or whatever, all the way through that, you feel like you're just can't catch a breath. The whole first act is just so you just it's. And one thing I've noticed too, and I've seen the movie 2 times. You've seen it
I've seen it 3,
right?
I just saw it last week.
The second time I was really settling into the movie more and paying attention to all the, especially Johnny Greenwood's score, how it's connecting all these scenes, and there's just this sense of you're watching almost it's mythic creation story of and in particular about this moment in time where these revolutionaries felt like they were on the cusp of doing something or getting through, and then you're just starting to slowly see how the sails are being taken out of that. And then that cut to Chase Infinity, and my review of the movie on Letterboxd, I opened with the lyrics from Dirty Work, which are playing in that scene, which I just want to read real quick. Light the candle, put the lock upon the door. You have sent the maid home early 1,000 times before. Like the castle in its corner in a medieval game, I foresee terrible trouble, and I stay here just the same. I was thinking about the lyrics after the movie. I was like, oh my God, that's just hitting the nail on the head in a not incredibly obvious way, but in a way that it still feels, and he's always used music obviously very well. I
thought this is a movie that is more showy about it, other than Boogie Nights, which that's a smorgasbord of Motown disco, But I feel like this is a way that is more showy than some of his others are, because he uses Johnny Greenwood so much. But I was going to talk about the John Bryan score in a second.
Go ahead.
You're
good.
I think that specifically is probably my favorite thing that has happened in movies in a while, is that specific section of when they leave Lockjaw at the camp, all the way up through a certain point where it's showing, him of Leonardo DiCaprio and Tiana Taylor falling in love, and her and then blowing stuff up, and that piece of score, basically up through when Lockjaw sees her and him while he's looking through binoculars, is one of the best pieces of film music ever. And it's not even on the soundtrack because it's John Bryan score. It's not even Johnny Greenwood's score.
Was that originally done for something else?
I don't know. I was kind of looking into that, and I think it was like music that they had wanted to use at some other point and didn't, or something, or maybe it's just music John Bryan had laying around. I don't know, but and the
he had obviously. I just wanted to say this about him.
Yeah,
he had. I mean. Anderson's worked with Greenwood since There Will Be Blood onward. Mm-hmm. And I felt like there's been really so much said about particularly that There Will Be Blood score, but the other scores too. John Bryan, those early scores are also really great too. And I feel like especially...
And this was a reminder of that for me
especially too. Punch Drunk Love score is literally a key part of that movie in a fundamental way.
I think there's parts of Magnolia's score that are really great. Because that movie also uses so much of the Amy Mann music that it's easy to forget. Mm-hmm. But particularly when I think of the William H. Macy scene where he tells... that guy that Brad, the bartender, that he loves him. The music is so big in that scene, and amazing. No, but literally, I think that's like one of the most amazing things I've ever seen in a movie. Is that montage with that music is transcendent beyond words. And I felt that when I was watching it the first time, but then especially the time since then.
Yeah.
And I think it's hard to justify to people why I almost sort of in a way prefer the first 40 minutes of the movie to the rest, which sounds like I'm saying I don't love the whole movie or something, but I just find some of that, like you said, it's like a creation story almost. It's like
it's told in like I said, in a very mythic filmmaking way while set in a contemporary setting.
And it's almost impossible to do something like that. Like to make something feel that way, especially in a movie that was made for like hundreds of millions of dollars.
And there's not exactly official voiceover narration in that, but there are like some of the Tiana Taylor phone call stuff that almost acts as like kind of almost pseudo narration, even though there isn't exactly a narrator.
Yeah.
And I think, too,
well, then she also says the 16 years later, nothing much has changed. And then at the end of the movie, she has the letter she reads, too. So she is kind of the unofficial narrator of the movie in its own way.
Yeah, I think, to talk about some of the cast a little bit, I think one of the key things that, like, makes this movie great, like a great sports team, is that it's a combination of people you know and love, people who are great but have not been great in a while, and then outright new faces.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier DiCaprio. It's going to be him and Chalamet in terms of the best picture or best actor, race in particular.
Yeah.
Chalamet's already been up for the prize a bunch of times and has yet to win. I think he's been consistently competing, depending on the movie, really since Call Me By Your Name. Mm-hmm. And he's been passed over these many times. And, DiCaprio was that guy for a long time in his own career before he finally won with The Revenant.
Right.
But DiCaprio finally getting this, and DiCaprio, and we know this as somebody who's watched a lot of Scorsese movies and has seen him in, obviously, Tarantino movies and other movies. Hilarious in this movie. I would actually go as far as say I think he should even win over Chalamet. I think that there needs to be a point where Chalamet does win, and he would even deserve to win this year. But I think like to give a mainstream movie a lead performance like this that is as funny as it is, to me is like, yeah, go ahead and give it to DiCaprio because he deserves it. Sean Penn is the villain, and Sean Penn has not had a movie where people honestly talked about him in a while in a serious way.
He was in all these, when people were talking about him, they were talking about the fact that this has been some time back. They were talking about the fact that he directed Into the Wild, or they were talking about, he directed that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Or they were
Milk. That was probably the last performance he was really, he even won an Oscar
or
for.
That he did that what was that movie? Independence Day? What was it called? No, not Independence Day. We really wanted to see
Flag Day?
Flag Day or something.
I'm going to look that up real
quick. Everybody kind of talked about that. He kind of just lost, and then he was in that movie Daddy-O too. I forgot about that.
Flag Day.
Flag Day. But yeah,
It was in the same year that Licorice Pizza came out, which he was in. Small role.
So, yes. So, yeah, and some people did talk about him a little bit with Licorice Pizza. But, yeah, they talk, obviously,
he basically played a William Holden stand.
Right. I mean, he might win Best Supporting Actor this year. It's very likely.
I think for a lot of people, the guy who maximized his screen time the most was Benicio del Toro as Sergio.
Sergio St. Carlos.
Again, the weekend the movie came out, all the memes that were already being generated about that character and what he represented to the movie in terms of like a real life Santa Claus figure, like a guy who just kind of comes out of nowhere and makes miracles happen, basically.
Yeah.
Regina Hall had a fairly small role. What's funny is she's an adaptation of my single favorite Pynchon character in DL in Vineland. Tiana Taylor, obviously, I think she's acted a little bit here and there. She's also a musician.
Such a commanding performance, I just want to say about that. I mean,
yeah,
dang. Especially be that section of the movie.
And just to round out the main cast here, Chase Infinity is just a totally new face who, entered the fold. I do just want to specifically mention she was named after the Batman Forever character, Chase Meridian.
Yes.
That cannot be not mentioned.
Right. Yeah, that's literally one of the most insane.
And her Infinity is her middle name, and she was named Infinity to Infinity and Beyond.
So 1995.
So 1995 in cinema is randomly very important to her life.
Yeah.
But anyways,
born in 1995?
She was born in 2000, actually.
Dadgummit. I was going to say that would be the perfect.
Yeah.
They had some 1995 fans in there.
There's been so many discussions
if it
about.
was a boy, it would have been like Neil Macaulay.
Like, so-and-so won the movie, or so-and-so actually is the scene stealer. And then there's tons of just very small supporting performances. I don't know
more
all
jokes?
of them. But
James Raderman, by the way, is his name.
Is there a particular performance or a comment to make to you about the confluence of these people in this movie or this cast in particular? PTA, since the very beginning, he said this about The Master, and I think this applies to all of his movies. Because there's a lot of conversation when that movie came out. It's 70 millimeter, you're shooting all this stuff in 70 millimeter, what's that all about? And it's not it's a historic movie, but it's not quite an epic. And he's like, well, I'm paraphrasing. He basically said the greatest special effect is an actor's face. Mm-hmm. He's amazing director of actors ever since the very beginning of his movies. From a one scene role of Philip Seymour Hoffman in Sydney all the way through this is what does this cast for you add to the movie in macro and micro ways? Or like I said, are any particular scenes or performances?
Well, I want to say
that
there's two performances in particular that stick out to me, and I also want to say before I say this that they're both men. I do want to say, however, this is very much a female movie, and I want to come back to that in a bit about what I mean by that, and talk about how great the female performances are too. So I don't want to just seem like I'm just singling out the men in the movie, because.
Because as you said,
the fact I'm even having to say that proves that the movie is so female.
Well, Tiana Taylor, as you said, I think she both gives a great performance, but I think part of the greatness of the performance is she's not somebody we've seen in a lot of stuff, so she commands this power.
And spoiler, she leaves the movie pretty quickly and isn't in it.
But she is this ghost figure who kind of haunts the movie.
She's the catalyst of the whole movie.
Yeah, right.
Everything is because of her. I mean, I was thinking back to. The catalyst of the entire movie is when she shoots that cop in the bank.
Yeah.
Is that's why everything happens. Literally every single thing. And, well, obviously you could go back further than that when Sean Penn's big pen is invoked. But, we'll talk about that later, I guess. Somebody said, I remember when the movie came out, they're like, I'm going to IMAX just to see how big it was on the screen. Our mom was so mad about that. Oh my god! I was like, just don't.
She was like, he's disgusting.
She's like, I would hit him in that. Yeah. But okay, so about Sean Penn, and I think they're what's great about these two performances, I'm going to say, is you have an ultimate hero and an ultimate villain. So let's start with the villain.
Who plays the Brock Vaughn
Right,
stand-in from Vineland.
Colonel Stephen J. Lockjaw. And when he won that like Medal of Merit or whatever later in the movie, Mama was like, "Oh, I thought he was making that name up when he first met her." And I was like, "No, that's literally what his name is."
Yeah.
Like, let's not also forget that Tony Goldwyn in the movie is Virgil Throckmorton, which is hilarious.
So that to just briefly say
yeah.
this, like the tradition of ridiculous Pynchon names is in many ways a tip of the hat is given
Right.
towards that without not being the same exact
Yeah,
names.
right. No.
Should be said.
Yeah. So anyway, Sean Penn in this movie, there are villain performances, and then there's this. It's like if you took Dennis Hopper in Speed and said, do Vince McMahon and some weird facial gestures, but then also be one of the main characters in the movie, like an actual character, not just like a
Cartoon.
the Dennis Hopper Speed version of a character, you know. He does things in this movie I was not aware could be done with a human face.
Yeah.
Literally, I'm like, literally, what is that on the screen? I mean, there's that one scene, this is about his hair, but there's that one scene where he's going to meet the Christmas adventurers, and he like licks his comb and is like combing it, and somebody tweeted he dead ass made it worse, which is like, you know, like he's like, it's, I don't want to like overdo the fact of like this is a vulnerable performance,
Yeah.
like on the level of like David Lynch's female performances, or like, you know, I don't want to like the stuff that's like really vulnerable, you know, that's like really you're going for something. But
Or like say Julianne Moore in Magnolia, as far
right,
as other
right,
PTA movies go.
or Julianne Moore in Safe, or Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence. Like, I mean, yeah, you could go through a ton. Like, and I think those are truly vulnerable performances. I mean, but I don't know. I still want to argue for this one as a very vulnerable performance because he is putting himself out there.
Yeah.
I mean, he's not like getting all the way naked the whole movie or anything like, you know, a lot of females are asked to do in these movies. And there are parts where he has to do things with his parts that I'm sure those were some prosthetics, but that he's having to do things that are very clearly like, wow, that is really humiliating.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, but I think what I love about that character, and I told her mom this, what I love about that character is he is a window, and I think Brock Vaughn is the same way, but a window into, okay, I do think, and we've, I think, talked about this before, the reasoning behind racism and racist policy in government is not always, I don't want to say that every single racist person in the world is, who's in power, is empowered by their own hang-ups or their own weirdness or their own trauma, in quotes, or their own whatever. I'm not saying everybody is like Edward Norton in American History X, where they've gone through some traumatic experience that has pointed them in a direction. I think there are some people that are just straight up mean and evil.
Yeah.
However, what I love about this character is that it says something about the people that are in power of why they really latch onto or go after these like policy decisions is informed by a certain depravity and a perversity about themselves that they are shamed by in and of themselves, or embarrassed by, or they're not seeing the like connection.
I think in particular you were like referring to like historically like laws about miscegenation and like race mixing that had
right, or
obviously
even
racist
like
policy.
homosexuality in politics,
Yeah.
and you know, all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to like paint that all as like, oh, we should feel sorry for all of these people or feel sorry for any of them. But I think when you endow, interesting word to use in this case, when you endow a character with that amount of complexity, I never feel sympathy for him, but I do think, oh, I feel like I understand this person. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Not that I ever agree with any of the way he feels either, but I'm like, oh, it's a character. It's a real person. It feels like a real person. And to say that Colonel Stephen J. Lockjaw feels like a real person means you've really done some really good character work.
And that's a combination of the writing, the directing of the actor and the actor themselves.
Right.
All those things have to be in concert with each other. And obviously,
and
I think
there were
it is.
aspects of that with Brock Vaughn too, in the sense of like being into these hippie women. This takes it to an actual, more real, practical sense.
I think later on we'll talk about the differences between that book and the movie. Obviously, one of them is there's a huge racial aspect to this movie that was not in the book. And that, specifically with the Lockjaw character, a lot of that's wrapped up in him in particular.
So I think he is otherworldly great.
Yeah.
I think that one scene in particular with him and Chase Infinity in the church where they're doing the paternity test is it's really funny, but it's just like really good acting. Like I was laughing so hard at that one part where he's like, "You should wear more makeup." Yeah. He's like, "You go to a school dance, you make an effort." Like, it's just like, and then of course the daddy-daughter games.
Yeah.
Daddy-daughter games. All the funny stuff.
Yeah.
No, I think he is like, this has got to be, if not his best performance he's ever given, like in the top 2 or 3 immediately best performances, and it's really.
I think it's randomly for him at this stage of his career a crucial one to give to remind everybody, because there was a period of time in the 80s and 90s he was the most respected young actor of that time period.
And when he was making the assassination of Richard Nixon, and and I think it's good for his politics too, because he's a very political figure. To make a movie so selflessly. And
also, like, he feels like a genuine, like, kind of original movie villain.
Yes.
Which I don't know the last time I've really felt like I've seen one of those where it's like, this guy he feels like this new, like, id the American psyche of just like, he's now always going to be, he's like a lockjaw type or a lockjaw figure. It's like,
kind of like the way people talk about Daniel Day-Lewis and Gangs of New York, like that took on a whole type of movie villain that, in certain ways, became Dark Knight with the Joker and the Dark Knight. Heath Ledger's Joker, and that's been its own type of movie villain, which has been literally dead and buried since 2008, basically, as far as like the versions people have done of that. But I think that'll stand.
So he's one. Who's the other one?
Benicio del Toro is my other one, and I think what I really love about him is like the opposite sense of that, about somebody who is always calm, always in control of their faculties, always has a plan, and then the tragedy of that being that by nature of his race and his place in the community, he's always had to have a plan. And has come up with all these things. But what's weird is it's almost like he does all this stuff you don't see this, but it's almost like he does all this stuff like a fire drill all the time. Because there's the scene where he brings him into room 24, which is his basically like living space, and his family's in there, and he's trying to, and DiCaprio, and I want to talk a lot about DiCaprio too in a little bit, but he's trying to find the phone, where to charge the phone, and he's like, "I want you to meet my family. Here's my grandpa or uncle, and here's my wife, and here's the new little child." And he talks to the child for a second, and DiCaprio's like, "Okay, yeah, whatever. Like, I need to get in that," but he's just like, "No, it's okay. It'll be okay. Ocean waves, Bob." I really love the scene where DiCaprio's on the phone with
that's
Comrade
also became
Josh.
a meme already.
I got him where I wanted. Hey, prick. When he
that scene should be the Oscar clip for DiCaprio at the Academy Awards.
I love that part too, where he's like, "Yeah, we spoke earlier, blah blah blah," and he's like, "I need you to give it to me," and he's like, "There's this real quiet where he's like, I told you before." He's like, "Yeah." Like, just this very
that's a
quick,
scene that feels like an adaptation of a Pynchon scene that is not exactly in the books in terms of like, oh, you call the hotline for the radical, the radical hotline, and like you have to wait on the phone. Like that feels like a Pynchon scene in the book and was not even in Vineland, but it feels like a Pynchonian scene. Right.
In that scene, I really love the way that Del Toro is walking around the room and getting under the bed to get the gun, getting some money ready he's got to give somebody, going over and washing his face, getting in there and like getting both of them a beer, and the whole time he's like, "I screwed up, man. And just like, and then that part where he's like looking out the window, DiCaprio is, and he like tries to mess with the blinds and they fall down, and he's like, I'm sorry, I messed up your blinds, man. And he kind of just looks in and he's like, it's okay.
Yeah.
And just like goes back to doing what he's doing. I mean, I think there are two really practical versions of heroism that I've seen in movies. One of them is not as much. One of them is Tom Hardy in Dunkirk. That's the one that's not as much because it's a heightened, like, and there's things about that where I'm like, I doubt that one person could do all that. But when I was watching that recently with some students of mine, I showed that, and just a reminder, I do actually teach. But you find time, and we were watching that, and I was like, that's probably literally the most heroic person that's ever been in a movie. Like, more because you feel that in an actual person. With like Superman, nothing against Superman, I don't know Superman, but or any Spider-Man, whatever. It's like, oh, okay, that's like whatever. It's all this kabuki cartoon, comic book, whatever. When you actually see somebody really do something.
Every time I've
like,
shown Dunkirk in class at the very end when he's taken by the Nazis. After he like lands his plane, every time I've had kids like, "What happened to him? Is he okay? Did he
like
die?
He's a real guy?"
And I was like, "Well, he would have went to a prisoner of war camp." I mean, and they're like, "Yeah, but did he make it out?" And I'm like, "Probably not." I mean, and that speaks to how that's a character we don't have any backstory towards, and yet we can. That movie builds this like goodwill that one
and
feels
it's a character that has
that
his
character.
face obscured for the majority of the movie. Even the Fallon. Or not Fallon, sorry, he's Fallon, I think. The other guy, Collins, even he's like, half the movie has his mask off. You see what he looks like. I mean, But I think, getting back to this, I think Del Toro's another version of what true heroism is somebody who is serving a community in a very definitive way, and in a very like literalized way, and being calm about the whole thing. And then be willing to not only save him, get him to a point once, but then go back and save him again.
And not only conspires to have his escape from the hospital, but is then waiting in the parking lot of the hospital with part of like a few cans of Modelo beer, and he's like, "Hey, let's take a selfie," which is like moment to moment you break down that and you're like, what? Why would you do why would you do that?
Right.
But and then what I love too is that picture was put out of canonically what the selfie basically would have been or was,
And it's funny to say about that moment, I expected our mom to say, why is she taking a picture of him? Is he against him? Or the weirdness of the moment.
Yeah.
She didn't even say that because even she understood this man can literally do no wrong.
Yeah.
He's literally
like I said, he's like a Santa Claus figure almost
and so
in the movie.
In another movie you would think, why is he taking a selfie of him? Is he saying, hey, come get him or something weird? And it's like, no, that question was never even asked. And so, anyway. But, and so and then the fact that he goes down for him on the getting arrested, for speeding. Yeah. A few small beers. That's the last moment he's in the movie, by the way, just to be clear. Yeah. Which is hilarious, but
I think, too,
or if they broke him out.
A scene that has really resonated with a lot of people, and I see it, I've retweeted it several times. It's one of my favorite pieces of score also in the music in the movie, is where DiCaprio's kind of it's them two in the car, and they're he's reflecting on I've not been the dad I could have or should have been, and I've raised her alone, and I don't even know how to do her hair because he's a white man talking about having kind of a biracial daughter, and Del Toro is this figure again. He's this Santa Claus figure who's there to hype him up and get him to in a place where. And the great irony of the movie is that, in theory, DiCaprio is the hero character who does actually not really anything heroic the entire run of the movie.
But he's trying.
He's trying. The whole point. And that's, as you said, that's the point. And he's like, don't go dark on me, Bob. And he's like, I won't. Very beautiful rendered stuff, And I think that, again, as you said, this is a movie that's actually mostly about women.
Yeah.
The Tiana Taylor part is an interesting one because, like I said, I think her not being as widely known has added a natural amount of power to her performance.
Right.
And that weird, and there's been some discourse on that character in terms of, is Paul Thomas Anderson shortchanging black women with that? And there's been some black women who would either agree or disagree with that, that have had their voices heard on that. So I don't want to overstep my bounds on that. But this feeling of there's a triple feeling of, why did she leave her family behind? She shouldn't have done that. I wish she would show up at the movie at any given moment just to see her again, because she's just such a freshly injected screen presence. Right. And then the third feeling, which is and I think this is what resonates on repeat viewings, is more Anderson understands the power of this performance, and not only this performance, this character's relation to the movie, and is just deciding to let that exist as this ghostly presence in the movie that's adds a great deal, I would say, of power to it. And so I really feel I really hope to see a lot more from Gianna Taylor, because I think she gives a great performance.
Yeah, and like I said, my favorite section of the movie is her. As far as that literal span of that montage where she's talking in the phone and it shows her running and the music and just all that is just, it's like a mythologization, like you said, a mythologization of a person. Yeah. In the moment. You can feel it where it's man, they're not going to last. In a classical way, I think. I think she's really good a little bit. I do want to talk about Chase Infinity, too, because she's obviously mostly a newcomer. I think what's so great about this entire movie, really, and what the heart of the movie is because it's her and DiCaprio. That's really what the movie's about. Yeah. And
it's a daddy-daughter game.
Right, it's a daddy-daughter game. That's what the whole movie is. And that I told my mom, I said, what's so genius about it is that she's a pretty capable person who has her coming-of-age moment through this, revolutionary violence. And that with her, she's being successful in everything she's doing. Pretty consistently. I mean, obviously she gets caught and things happen, but she gets out of that eventually. And her dad's constantly just a little bit behind where she's at, and he's trying, but he's bumbling forward, and she's having.
And he's resenting himself that he can't remember,
and he's having to excavate out of it. So, like I said, it's this kind of coming together of both people, and I mean, I think that's really what the whole theme is. It's about a father and a daughter. Reconciling over their differences, but in this heightened, obviously,
actually, in the end,
way where they're
apart.
They're apart for most of the movie. I mean, I'm trying to think. They share basically really two really major scenes. Yeah, it's kind of the first early-ish in the movie, and then at the end.
Going back to the Johnny Greenwood score for a second, one of my favorite moments in the whole movie is. When Bob and Wheeler are on the run in the beginning, they're given these Motorola little trackers of each other that when they're close to someone else who has one, they make this sound, which becomes a very subtle music sound cue throughout the movie. The first time with Regina Hall and her. But then also, where...
That's such a great shot, by the way, where she walks in and you see her in the mirror and she's not even, in the frame. She's in the mirror. That's great. Anyway.
Yeah. And then, it's... And, after everything we've been through at the very end of the movie, it's, this very kind of touching, powerful music cue that speaks to, and they're pointing guns at each other, but it's she asks him, who are you? And doesn't even trust that,
who are you?
Her own eyes...
Right.
Was seeing him or whatever, and then eventually that she that realizes it's him, she's asked to do a lot of stuff physically in this movie, action wise,
car chases and
and I think
struggling and fighting,
and so she's just shooting. And the fact that she has enough confidence to play alongside of Leonardo DiCaprio and Sean Penn, who's honestly she has probably the most amount of screen time with, other than Regina King, That's just a high degree of confidence and also direction, I'm sure, that went into all of that to culminate for her. So all that adds up to a very convincing. This is officially her film debut, I believe. I think she was on some TV
Presumed
shows.
Innocent, just last year.
Yeah, Presumed Innocent, the television show. And then it's going to be in The Testament. And then also she's going to be in the Julia Says a movie coming out next year. So, again, very amazing, convincing, like, first film performance, I would say. Going back to the lead, Leonardo DiCaprio. So this kind of, for Anderson, completes a set of, he's worked with Tom Cruise. Mm-hmm. He's worked with Daniel Day-Lewis multiple times. He's worked with Joaquin Phoenix multiple times. I know him and DiCaprio have talked about each other over the years, saying they wanted to work with each other and they just couldn't find the right project. And then finally this comes. This is a great older Leo part. We talked about, we referenced this a little bit when we were talking about Leo in Catch Me If You Can, as far as a younger Leonardo DiCaprio. What do you think this, like, you know, Leo, he's not played really a father hardly ever at all, because I know he's, as we know, not a father. So this was a little bit of like him in a different context for moviegoers. What do you think he contributed as the lead of this movie? Because it should be said, he's based on the Zoid Wheeler part of Vineland. Mm-hmm. I would say
he's in and of himself not really a character compared to, not the main character, I should say, of that book.
Well, I think, he kind of starts off, you think he is.
Right, and then he kind of
he doesn't. But DiCaprio is definitively the lead of this movie. Mm-hmm. What do you make of Bob Ferguson as or Ghetto Pat also, which I love?
Yes, technically his name is Pat Calhoun, Ghetto Pat, Rocket Man, also Bob Ferguson. It's funny how many names some of the people in this movie have.
What do you make of DiCaprio as a Paul Thomas Anderson unlikely hero?
Well, it's a very Pynchonian. I feel like he's the most Pynchonian aspect of the movie in terms of the character is very Pynchonian.
Other than the whole like Christmas Adventurers,
that's
conspiratorial.
Yes,
like,
and we'll talk
aspect.
about that here in a bit too, because I have some things about that. Kevin Teague can do no wrong. Who was that guy that's in Roadhouse. I mean, I think he's. It's one of those things where like you've always said that DiCaprio is one of our great shouting actors. He takes it to another level here. Great phone acting. I feel like that's a whole section of the movie is him just phone acting. Mm-hmm. Phoning it in, as it were.
And like a lot of stoner dads, he can't find his charger. He's like constantly struggling with getting on the right track of things. So,
Right. Can't take photos of himself.
Yeah.
Dad did that literally the other day, and I just looked at him and said, that's literally a part in the movie we're going to watch soon, where he was like looking at it. He was like, how do you like flip it around?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's interesting, too, that he's, like, pretty good at doing explosives and stuff. But what's interesting is that through that's something you can do and walk away, or you can do from far away. In this movie, he's got to be, like, right in it. And in that, he can't really...
He's good at blowing stuff up. He's not as good at picking up the pieces.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the central metaphor for that character.
Right. No, I think he's really good, and he has to do a lot. He does a lot of running. Falling. I swear, he fell off of that building. There ain't no way it wasn't him.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how they did that, but that was, like, crazy. How he just, like,
one of the
fell
most
off of that
impressive stunt work
building.
moments of the year.
And then got shocked immediately after that. Those are one of the great lines that all the kids thought was funny when I showed them the trailers, where they're like, what's your name? That Batman. And then he's like, Peter Parker. And they're like, okay. And he's like, Jim Parker. So he's Jim Parker should be listed on the Wikipedia page as another name. What do you think about him in the movie? You can speak more to that than me.
I think what I like about this seems like a beginning character in him working with Paul Thomas Anderson. So I hope there's more to it, because it robs DiCaprio of like some of his like, in some often cases, like his trademark confidence he sometimes has in roles, and takes that away from him. Well, a lot of DiCaprio parts are about, it seems like he has confidence, but actually he doesn't. There's this hidden thing. And I feel like
in this he doesn't and he doesn't.
I feel like he's.
Let's not and say we didn't.
They've both talked. I think PTA and DiCaprio both talked about how he was like the 7th or 8th most important member of the French 75, and then at the end he's like the last one standing out of that group.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like if all the most important people are killed off or
it's
exiled
kinda like
or
that
something.
in the Red Dead games.
It's
as
like,
far as,
all right, what are you going to do about this whole thing?
Yeah, it's kind of like that in the Red Dead games, or even if you go all the way back, Daddy Dark Red Dead games. If you go all the way back to the Wild Bunch, I mean, it's the same thing with Robert Ryan. It's like he was like in the group, but like, was he that big of a deal, really? And like, similar thing.
And I think some of the most memorable scenes for me of DiCaprio, among a great many in this movie, are like the scenes of him just sitting at home alone, smoking pot, watching Battle of Algiers on TV.
Yeah, I love that moment. He's like, and now we will know our true enemy.
Yeah. But there's that one scene in particular where things are starting to go wrong, and he's like, don't get paranoid.
Don't panic.
And like the Johnny Greenwood scored during
and
that
then he
moment.
like smokes pot immediately after that.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not going to
There's been a lot of comparisons with this character to the dude
in
The Big Lebowski, and I think that there's definitely some there. He also had a very memorable costume and outfit that has already been made into like a Halloween costume with just this Halloween season.
the glasses and the
And I think just like, again, like just how hilarious in particular that phone scene is.
Yes.
To me, feels like it should kind of just clinch the Oscar for him this year. It's just like I love Timothée Chalamet and
sure.
Barry Supreme, and if he were to win, I think that'd be totally great, and I'm totally fine because the argument can be made, well, DiCaprio already has his Oscar.
He needs to win another one.
I would agree, but like, so he's already won it, you could say, but I think also it's like, no, he needs to win again for this though too.
I was even saying earlier about Chalamet that like I think he will win. I don't even necessarily think he should. I do think that DiCaprio is the better of the two. Although my son needs to win one. But yeah,
he was amazing in Barry Supreme, so I don't want to take anything away from that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah. Well, I think this is a more like impressive performance in the media. But it's so impressive it almost you get lost in it where you're not even thinking about it because it's just so like manic and crazy that.
And I don't want to spend this time like downgrading Tom Cruise in any way, because there's a lot of things that are said about him like, oh, he's the last real movie star and this and that. I think to me the reason it might be DiCaprio, and I think that's like there's been last real movie star conversations for 50 plus years. So
I think I made the joke about the Squall Man recently that I was like, the guy that was in that was the last great movie star. What was his name? Hang on, it was I don't even know. Dustin Farnham. He was the last great movie star. You know?
But the thing about with DiCaprio is to me is that he keeps trying. He keeps like. He's really always like stretching himself out and putting himself in like not flattering movie star part positions. That Tom Cruise I do think
Tropic Thunder. He did.
I think Digger is going to be like, okay, you're doing something again that I'm excited to see what that is. So that'll be a movie I know we talk about next year in some capacity, but. With this, it's like him playing a dad, him playing the stoner part. It was just very different for him. And again, I really hope that movie stars of a certain age keep pushing the boundaries and doing stuff like that with him. Even, I mean, he's older and it was a supporting part, but as we said, Sean Penn, he was doing something different in this movie that I think speaks well of him and his actor's imagination. So I've been a fan of DiCaprio for many decades now, really ever since Titanic. I mean, oh, that guy, he's good to look at in a movie. And really ever since then, that's not changed all that much. Right. We could talk a little bit about, this is an adaptation of Vineland. I know when it was initially not only announced, basically it came out and footage started to be shown, there was admittedly a part of me that was like, okay, this is not set in the 80s and in the 60s. Like, there was part of me that was like, why can't we just straight up adapt it the way that the book was?
Yeah.
But I do think Anderson does a really interesting, imaginative adaptation of the book that it makes a good argument for like, no, we don't need to be as precious about adaptations. Yeah. Take what you like from it. And this might sound very like, well, why are you doing this? But take what you like from it. And do your own thing, because the book is still going to be that book that was released in 1990. Nobody's going to take anything away from that. So why don't you just go on and do your own thing?
Yeah.
With it,
Well, also the book, I mean, literally the adaptation is saying what I said about Pynchon earlier, is that he's a writer that's concerned about autocracy's eternity, and therefore this movie literally says multiple times one battle after another is literally the name. We've constantly been fighting this battle, and Tiana Taylor through Perfidia Beverly Hills. That's also one of the most Pynchon names, by the way. Just want to put that at Perfidia Beverly Hills. Her letter at the end of the movie is basically saying we failed. Maybe you can do better.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Chase Infinity's character is going to say that to her child eventually. You know, I mean, so I mean, it's that's the whole point of the movie in its own way. Like I said, of also putting it in a different time period, is that it works because it's an eternal fight and battle. And I mean, and Pynchon said the same thing.
I think I don't know. I think theoretically Pynchon would like that it just did its own thing and was not too precious about it in theory. But Anderson clearly knows him and has had substantive conversations with him, so he obviously would have a better idea what he would think about it than obviously we would.
He would probably connect to the fact about the child stuff too, because he's got a son that's not really that old. It's kind of your age or in between me and you. Mm-hmm. So he's not very old himself, so he probably sees some aspects of that in the movie too.
Was there any part of you that was like, oh, I wish it would have been that, or you were just like, I'm just glad?
No,
outside of all that, as we've said, Anderson himself had not made a contemporary movie, so that was like, on that side of things, it was like, well,
I was happier
needs
about
to happen
that.
more so than whether or not this book is a one-to-one.
Right, because I think that also I'd seen him make so many Haim music videos and then also stuff for Radiohead, and I was just like, oh, this looks so, and I haven't even talked about how beautiful the movie looks. I want to say that towards the end, but that to make things look that good in the modern day was like nice to see, because as great as his movies are, even something like There Will Be Blood, it's not the most colorful film. I mean, it has a lot of color. It's beautiful to look at. The Master's a little more colorful, but then you have stuff like Inherent Vice and Phantom Thread and Licorice Pizza, which are all in this more definitively like there's color. And so when you set something in the modern day, you're going to get color. Well, if you do it the right way. Obviously, a lot of people don't do that. No, I didn't really, that didn't bother me that bad, because also I knew it was like, well, it's more inspired by it, and I was like, okay, well then fine.
I will say, my biggest frustration as an adaptation specifically was the DL character was not all that much in the movie, and that's more so because I really love that character on the page.
And we didn't talk as much about Regina Hall because frankly she's just not in the movie as much either.
And again, that character to me in the book is such this great mentor, this missing puzzle piece of the past, who she in of herself was in love with
Frenesi,
the Tiana Taylor analog in Vineland. So I am a little minorly disappointed as a fan of the book about that. But in a movie that already has so much other stuff going on, that's just you gotta cut bait eventually and say, well, you gotta focus on ultimately what this is about. She does have
one of my favorite images in the movie, which is that close up of her face when they're around the bonfire. Is a really good close up. You want to talk about the Christmas Adventurer stuff?
Yeah, so as we said, that is kind of one of the most... It could have been a Pynchon subplot of Vineland, but not exactly, but it really feels like it is. So there's a group in the movie called the Christmas Adventurers Club, and they're basically this like white supremacist secret society that exists that Lockjaw is attempting to become a member of. And some of the characters in that side of things, Tony Goldwyn plays a character called Virgil Throckmorton. Very memorably, Jim Downey plays a guy by the name of Sandy Irvine.
He has that great line where he's like, "We're together for one cause, to find dangerous lunatics, what was it? No, what was the whole thing? Now, it was dangerous lunatics, haters, and punk trash.
Yeah.
And, basically. Anyway.
He, to me, has one of my favorite line readings in the movie later on where Sean Penn is having to explain, did you father a child with basically this black separatist?
Right.
And he's like, well, I was raped and reversed. And there's like this whole scene of him trying to explain that. And Jim Downey, after hearing him say everything, he's like, a semen demon.
Yeah.
Like, question mark.
Yes, and he does it so seriously though. He's like, "Oh yes, I've heard of the term." Like,
Jim Downey also had a few scenes in There Will Be Blood.
Yeah.
It should be said.
He's really good also on The Chair Company, which is out right now. So he's kind of having a moment.
He's I think he used to be a big writer on Saturday Night Live. Who Maya Rudolph, PTA's partner, used to, of course, be a member of. So that's the thing. PTA's got this whole like wellspring of comedy background of sorts with a lot of associations and relationships with people,
right? In
large part through that. But then also, it should be said, that is like counterpointed by something that is a little closer to the book, which is the what's the Sisters of the what's it called?
The Sisters of the Brave Beaver.
The Sisters of the Brave Beaver, which is a little closer to like
the Ninja Nuns.
The Ninja Nuns
right.
in
they had a name. I don't
Vineland.
recall it off the top
And
of
I do like that the movie kind of represents and says there are these both the secret society basically for good, and then there's the secret society not for good. What do you think that whole like Christmas adventurers like subplot added to both the movie in general, but also maybe Lockjaw specifically? Because that's mostly how it's engineered into the movie, is associations through Lockjaw. Or how Lockjaw is trying to get
obviously
that
right. Well, I think that represents Pynchon at his best because it's played for comedy, but it's also like if you really just take it on its base, it's like pure evil, obviously. And so it's kind of, I think the movie does play towards its comedy a little too much sometimes, rather than being explicitly more funny, because it tries to put a lot of its like evil on the John Hugenocker character, who's like the driver guy, Tim Smith,
like the hitman,
who is like, by the way, don't forget the Dilly Dilly guy.
Oh, right.
Which is random. I'd forgot.
He's been in some other commercials.
Yeah,
and stuff,
he's like the guy that has to go after Lockjaw and kill him. By the way, we forgot to mention, and if you probably know what this movie's about by now, but that Lockjaw impregnated Perfidia back in the 16 years before, and he's actually really the father of Willa, who was the Jason Finney character. And so he's trying to get into this club, and he knows that when they start doing some digging, they're going to figure out that he's actually the father of a biracial child. Yeah. And so they're not going to let him in, obviously. And so he's wanting to go after her and, first of all, find out if he actually is the parent, and if it's so, dispose of her, and if not,
don't you feel like there's a Pynchonian idea in this, like, evil organization have its own warped sense of justice that works in the moral arc of the universe of what the overall story is trying to say too?
Yes. Yeah, because I think I keep saying it, the fact that literally a white supremacist looks at another white man and says raped in reverse. Yeah. Can you explain that to me? Is literally like, even he's like, let's cut the BS. That literally doesn't make any sense. Yeah. Like, we all know that that's not a thing, even though like in public, they might even say, oh yeah, women set men up to do blah, blah, blah. Even in the behind closed doors nature of that is very like, no, that's stupid. Yeah.
And that we know as the audience, and Lockjaw knows that he was getting a lot of satisfaction from that whole thing.
He literally said she was the greatest witch I ever saw. She was a witch. Like, she was possessed. He says at one point. So I mean, obviously, it's not justifying them in the movie at all, but it is also saying, no, they're going to take care of him also, like, Yeah. And that's the best that they can even ever do is take that man off the planet, basically, is like,
It kind of has two deaths. One that we think is going to happen where he's shot in the car.
Our mom got so mad. She was like, oh my God. When he like walked up and he was like, had the blood all
like
on
a Terminator
him. Yeah, it
shot.
looked like a Terminator. And then we were all laughing about, they were like, they ain't really going to let him in.
Yeah.
And I was like, no.
Yeah.
You know?
Then he gets gas.
Right. And then that hilarious moment where it shows the shot of him like with his feet propped up, dead, and his like scarred face. So yeah, I think that that's a Pynchonian aspect of this too, is that like you find that in the books too, of that like they let some of the main characters go based on these principles they have, or because something else happened they had to deal with, or like, you know, the fact that he basically in Inherent Vice that Doc kills Adrian Prussia, just straight up shoots him and kills him, and that they're like, everybody else, the powers that be, is just like, well, we just want the drugs, and otherwise we don't really care.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. And so, similarly, yeah. I mean, I do want to say about Kevin Teague, who's always great in everything, was in, most people think of him as being like the bar owner in Roadhouse. And he was also in, I think he was on Lost a little bit, apparently.
I think it was John Locke's father.
Oh, okay. And then he was in some other movies here and there. I also remembered he was on, I think, at least 1 or 2 episodes of Tales from the Crypt. He was like a very 90s guy. I've always thought he's good and everything. And he's like the old guy in the group in this, and doesn't really say anything for most of the Christmas Adventurers like Inner Sanctum scene.
Yeah.
And then, you know, very creepily says that line about it needs to be so clean we can eat off the floor.
Yeah.
Which like is so kind of funny, but you're like,
Yeah.
what? Like, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's a very like
Yeah.
a horrific
Yeah.
thing to say. So I think that's what's great about this movie too. Like you said, it just throws in all these random actors here and there. Wood Harris was in this, who of course was in The Wire. Alana Haim was in this very briefly. I really like Paul Grimstad in the movie also, as the like he was the Billy Goat guy, or the Gringo Coyote they called him. He's the guy that like helps him escape, and then they capture, you know.
Yeah, I recently watched the Ronald Brownstein movie Frownland. He's actually one of the main actors in that.
Oh, really?
And I was like, he's a lot younger then. I was
Right.
like, oh, that's an actor.
And of course, we mentioned him a little bit earlier, but really love James Raderman in this movie as like the interrogator. Mm-hmm. That's another thing that is like really chilling, because you laugh so much at it, and then you're like, oh, this is not really that funny, obviously, but like that part where he's like, I thought you took AP Common Sense. Sit the F down. Like, and I said the whole part was like, oh, no more jokes.
Yeah.
Like, you know. So yeah, I think great, like I said, cast overall, and that whole aspect of the movie I think is interesting. All the villains. I think the movie has a really good population of good guys and villains. Yeah. I feel like usually in a lot of movies, all the villains are more interesting than like the good guys. I feel like there's plenty of like good, quote unquote, good characters in this movie that are interesting.
There's been actually, I don't know how much of this you've seen. Several observations by both DiCaprio especially, but also PTA a little bit. I think both kind of as a joke, but also genuinely, that there's a lot of Star Wars parallels to this story, and this whole idea of like a mythology at work beyond your own comprehension, and there's this whole world that like you have suggestions of. We know that's not what modern Star Wars is anymore, but like those original movies, especially how they operate on a lot of mere suggestion, and that how that just obviously builds out a world that all you gotta do is give little teases of, and it makes the world feel obviously a lot bigger. And I think that's an apt comparison. Ends on a happy note, a happy ending for. I would say the last so many PTA endings have been, for the most part, happy or pleasant.
Yeah.
The suggestion that
The Master has a happy ending. No, not really. But,
well, in a certain sense,
yeah,
it
in a
does.
certain sick sort of way. The way that I won't, you know.
I don't want to go on too long about that. That's a movie more about like reaching a level of contentment, if not exactly happiness, like as far as where that concludes.
Yeah, right.
But like this has, I think, a more expressly happy ending And I think it ends on the very funny note of Bob trying to figure out how to take a selfie, which is in of itself its own little statement. You feel like that's a conversation PTA and his own daughters have had.
Yeah.
And also this idea that Willa is going to go on and be another version of maybe her mother. Excuse me. And then also that there might be a suggestion of them like reconnecting or like something could happen there, but that's just merely left as suggestion. Like we don't really know if obviously that's going to happen. What's the just sense of feeling this movie leaves you with? As a PTA film, as it's an adaptation of Thomas Pynchon, as just a film in of itself, like what's the feeling you walk away from one battle after another
If
with?
this movie were, and this isn't the type of movie it is, but if this movie were like Ludwig Kaiser and walked out and said, "I demand your gratitude," I would immediately bow down and parts of me would clap.
Yeah.
I did want to say real briefly, and this will go into what the answer is about the way this movie looks.
Yeah.
I'm not even just saying this. It might literally be one of the most beautiful movies ever made, just visually.
The cinematographer is Michael Ballman.
And I think PTA kind of uncreditedly worked on it, too, because, he's done that.
In particular, Michael Ballman, he was credited as a lighting cameraman on Phantom Thread, a co-cinematographer of the Anderson on Licorice Pizza, and then he's the sole credited cinematographer on this, but PTA is somebody who's
probably did a lot of the work.
Operate the camera, and Phantom Thread was the first movie where...
And this looks very much like a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, very clearly. And I think that's what I was going to say, is what I loved so much about this movie, and when I left it, I felt like, okay, I don't want to say this is Paul Thomas Anderson's coming out movie, because he's made, this is what, his
made movies for almost 30 years.
10th movie or whatever. So I don't want to say like, oh, this is his coming out movie. He's made it. He's arrived because he's been around. The sad fact is, that is true for a certain segment of the population of the Earth. Obviously, a very large population of the Earth.
This is officially his 10th movie. I just counted.
I was really in love with the fact that this movie looked like it did, and it was a blockbuster action movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that you were, I don't know, this sounds like a weird thing to say, but like to see modern day soldier kind of combat wear lit like a Paul Thomas Anderson movie was so weird that it was like, this is the best thing ever. Literally, it's just like that. A movie was made to look like that. Is because him and Barry Jenkins are really the people that understand the texture of filmmaking and the way it looks, literally visually, and so that meant everything to me as just as a aesthetic reality.
I remember in particular, it's funny you mentioned that I think it was around the time Moonlight came out. Moonlight and or If Only Beale Street Could Talk.
If Beale Street Could Talk is the one I felt that way about explicitly.
Where it was like either a round table or there was like several directors that were there. I don't remember. And anyways, he complimented, Anderson complimented Barry Jenkins on his close-ups. And Barry Jenkins almost like fell back. He's like, imagine Paul Thomas Anderson compliments you on your close-ups, because he was like, he's just like the master of the close-up, some of those memorable, like I said, the best special effect is actors' faces. Yeah. So as you said, literally understand the texture.
Yeah, because you had said before, you had said this, that Barry Jenkins a lot like the American Wong Kar-wai as far as the way that he lights and creates texture.
Yeah.
And I think PTA does that in a more subtle way. I think this movie was the biggest version of that. Yeah. It felt deeper and darker and more lush than even some of his more recent movies have in a total way. And maybe that's Ballman in that too, obviously, as far as the keep going in that direction. So it meant the world. It meant everything to me. I know the movie, that's the great thing about a great movie, is it's for everyone. but it really did feel like, wow, the movie I've been waiting for my whole life. And not even saying it's my favorite movie or it's even the best movie or necessarily, but just a version of a movie I've wanted for forever has finally come out. That it's like an action movie that actually has a story, and actually has characters, and actually cares, and isn't afraid about its length, and, I mean, as Kevin Hart said in an impression of Shaq, it's everything. So,
Is this the movie where he finally wins his Academy Award for Best Director? It seems as though all roads are pointed in that direction right now.
Maybe even Best Picture, too. I don't know.
Because, at least in that department, ever since he's been making movies, he's had the least amount of competition in this year with this than he has. Because, very famously, when There Will Be Blood came out, obviously No Country for Old Men was also coming out, and the Coens won almost, I'm sure they even thought, an embarrassing amount of Oscars for that movie. And this seems like the biggest shot at that he's had since then. I think there was a little bit of one for Phantom Thread, but that didn't quite exactly materialize. It seems like we're also reaching a point in certain filmmakers where they're just like saying this person finally gets it.
It happened with Nolan.
Nolan happened a few years ago with Oppenheimer. It really feels like, knock on wood, that this is the year it happens. It could even happen in multiple categories with not only, I think he was a credited producer. So he would win a best picture, obviously best director if he were to win that, and then even maybe screenplay also if that were to win. So.
One other person I want to mention that I forgot is Eric Schweig as Avanti, the bounty hunter in this movie. Yeah, just that he has a minor redemption.
Yeah, right.
He goes out blasting, which is always great.
This and Sinners both had Native American parts that. This obviously was
that guy. Actually, by the way, that guy that was the lead bounty hunter in that movie, or vampire hunter in that movie, was also in Train Dreams, which I know you haven't seen. Because I was like, that's that guy from Sinners. I immediately recognized him because he literally looks almost exactly the same. Yeah. But anyway.
So one battle after another. Two thumbs way up from Ticket Stubs.
Or four, however you want to do that.
Yeah.
Before we've got two.
Well, they both have.
Opposable
Siskel and
thumbs.
Ebert had one thumb that they could submit.
Well, they should have had two. So. Because sometimes you want to do this.
Yeah. Well,
thumb up, thumb down, Not with this movie.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, like, in general,
So I'm sure we're going to touch on this more when we get to our Harry Dean Awards.
I feel like we'll
talk about it a little more then. But to move on to another new piece of Pynchon.
I feel kind of bad because we're probably going to talk way less about this one than we did this, but
artistry that's entered the world was Shadow Ticket this year. And what's funny was this was like literally 2 or 3 weeks after One Battle After Another came out. So and we knew this ahead of time, looking at the counters, like there's going to be this one really fertile period of Pynchon.
The year of the Ruggles
discussion. Yes.
I should say, can I say, by the way, and we'll talk about this in a minute. I did read Vineland again this year. Yeah. Before this, I read Inherent Vice, and then I also read Bleeding Edge for the first time fully. I'd read half of it before. So, and then Shadow Ticket. So I've read 4 Pynchon books this year.
So Shadow Ticket, which is set during the 1930s. When I heard that, my interest was raised because I think the 1930s is such a...
You're a 1930s hog. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, like, you're very interested in that. So, I knew that.
Yeah, the 30s to me is, storytelling-wise, a very rich time period because it's immediately foregrounded by what we know is coming with World War II. So there's always this scary monster waiting at the end of the tunnel or the chasm or whatever.
Well, what's fascinating too, particularly, is that this book is set in that weird period of 1931-32.
Yeah.
And why that's important is because when you put the 1930s in the timeline, you've got the Roaring 20s before, or even World War I at the end of the teens, the Roaring 20s, the Depression, and you really only majorly talk about the Depression for Well, you talk about it through 32 and 33 because that's when FDR comes in. But, like, 32 is that because then after that you have the rise of Nazism in 1933. And so that 32 is that weird indeterminate period right there in the middle. Which is obviously, this book's a lot about Nazism. And Pynchon's support of it. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously not. But what if this was the book where he was just like, no, you know what, actually, I've just been a Nazi.
All been a ruse.
It's all been a ruse. Like,
Can I read just really quickly the
go
synopsis actually of the book? This was also what, like, the first thing Levi and I read about what this book's about, and it immediately was like, okay.
Yeah.
Milwaukee, 1932. The Great Depression going full blast, repeal of Prohibition just around the corner, Al Capone in the federal pen, the private investigation business shifting from labor management relations to the more domestic kind. Hicks McTaggart, a one-time strikebreaker turned private eye, thinks he's found job security until he just got sent out to what should be a routine case, locating and bringing back the heiress of a Wisconsin cheese fortune who's taken a mind to go wandering. Before he knows it, he's been shanghaied onto a transoceanic liner, ending up eventually in Hungary, where there's no shoreline, a language from some other planet, and enough pastry to see any cop well into retirement, and of course no sign of the runaway heiress he's supposed to be chasing. By the time Hicks catches up with her, he will find himself entangled with Nazis, Soviet agents, British counterspies, swing musicians, practitioners of the paranormal, outlaw motorcyclists, and the troubles that come with each of them, none of which Hicks is qualified, forget about being paid to deal with. Surrounded by history he has his nose gasp on and can't see his way around in or out of, the only bright side for Hicks is that it's the dawn of the big band era, and as it happens, he's a pretty good dancer. Whether this will be enough to allow him somehow to Lindy hop his way back around to Wisconsin into the normal world, which may no longer exist, is another question. So that's Shadow Ticket. 304 pages, which I just want to mention, and that's like
in the shorter
realm of Pynchon's books.
I think that it's the second shortest only to the Crying Lot 49. I think every other book is longer. V is randomly long.
Yeah.
In memory, I kind of forget how long it is. And then Bleeding Edge and Inherent Vice are both longer. Bleeding Edge is actually kind of long, too. It's like over 400 pages. And Inherent Vice is longer than this, but I don't remember how long exactly. But anyway.
What did you think of Shadow Ticket?
I want to ask you. I want to ask you actually
a
question. Are you convinced by Shadow Ticket? Whatever that question even means. That's the way I wanted to phrase it.
No.
Okay.
And I say this to somebody who liked the book, would even give it 4 out of 5 stars. But I think, I'll be honest, I think part of that comes out of
Inherent Vice was 369 pages, by the way. Just saying.
Comes out of just like, oh, we got another Pynchon book, and I mean that genuinely, not just out of like automatic like adherence.
This is your version of the like way people felt about Vineland, I guess.
I guess so, yeah. I think it's because we all know there's only so many of these left. The fact that this even came was like, oh, yeah, okay. Right. So
I
that's
didn't
great.
expect one until he was dead, personally.
So that in of itself I was very grateful for. I think like with these last, especially 2 books, but we can talk about 3 books with Inherent Vice, Bleeding Edge, and this. Has already been something we've been talking about, and a lot of people have already started to identify, which is like all 3 of these are detective stories.
Yep.
That pot boilers. Now, very juicy, like rich pot boilers, of course, because they're written by him. And all 3, and I think the best out of these is by far Inherent Vice. They have a lot of juice and like a lot of like historical allusions and like, oh, connect the dots, and it's like, oh, what does he think about the dot-com boom? Well, of course, Bleeding Edge is that there.
And about 9/11 and the conspiracy culture around 9/11.
And this is like, and this feels like implicitly a prequel to Gravity's Rainbow or something, because that's, of course, his other biggest book about like Nazism.
Yeah.
But there's also that feeling, and not in a good way as much, of like, and the good version of this is like, I'm watching Twin Peaks The Return, and I'm looking at the clock, literally and figuratively, I'm like, time's running out. What's he going to do?
What are you going to do with the time left?
And Lynch did the most amazing, masterful thing ever. With
he put a gun in an air fryer and it didn't go off. I mean, I say that all the time, but that's literally like the most direct image that you could possibly have to explain that, is like the tension that doesn't let up ever.
Yeah.
It still hasn't.
And this book felt like I'm watching the clock go by, and I'm turning the pages, and I'm like, I'm looking at the page count, and I'm like, what are we doing? Where are we going? Like,
we're worrying a lot about these daggum motorcycle races in Hungary.
And that was actually interesting to read.
Yeah, it is.
But like, we talked about this ourselves. Like, the Hicks McTaggart character kind of starts to just disappear from the book.
Yeah, he's a lot like
in this mysterious way in the last, say, like
Gravity Rainbow.
75-ish pages.
Yeah,
where you're like, okay, he's just kind of not here as much anymore. And the book reaches this resolution that I was just like, what was all that about then? What was all that for? I felt like I got as much out of what the idea of the book was reading that synopsis than I did from actually reading the book.
Right.
There were some touching things with Hicks and him talking about some of his relationships and some of the dance scenes.
Yeah.
You remember?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, like, oh, this is good. This is rich.
Mm-hmm.
But then the book just kind of spirals off into whatever land, literally and figuratively. And I was and so the book kind of left me cold. Mm-hmm. Even though I still liked it and I'm very appreciative of it. And I would even bet I would reread the book and get more out of it than I did the first time. And I'm sure I will. And of course, I'll probably read it multiple times over the course of my life if I'm blessed enough to. Yeah. But just this first time, I think especially coming after one battle after another, which is just another thing. But you're implicitly like, oh my God, this reached these mountaintops. Yeah. And then this, oh, what about this? Like a primary source from the creative mind that in its own way inspired that. And you're like, huh, okay. And I don't say this with a bit of like glee. It felt like an old man writing a book just about, I'm kind of into the 30s and these are the things I'm into.
I'm really into cheese.
That was the most like, and that honestly, it didn't have as many cheese puns or cheese humor as you would even expect it to from a
especially
Pynchon book.
Even from what a lot of the reviews talked about. Yeah. I feel like I
feel like they were trying to latch onto that. Yeah. Another thing that happened too was the initial review I think was put out by the New Yorker. Mm. As that one villain on the Freakazoid, I can say I subscribe to the New Yorker.
I think I mostly read the New York Times review. I don't know if I read the New Yorker one. New York Times was pretty in the middle. So
it was, the name of this review is reading the new Pynchon novel in a Pynchon-esque America. And the blurb. This is written by
I did read that.
Catherine Schultz. Now. Shadow Ticket, Pynchon's first book in a dozen years, unfolds its conspiracies in Depression-era Milwaukee and beyond, but it lands in a moment when reality seems to have caught up with its fictions. I don't quite agree with the...
No. I think this book is very political. I just want to say, even more than you, I think it is, but I do not think it's political about our current moment.
Yeah, I don't quite agree with that framing of things.
Yeah.
But then, like, and a lot of people that even some I like on, like, Twitter who are, like, Pynchon fans jumped on this and attacked it. It's like, well, who cares what you think about it? Like, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what, somebody can't have an opinion about, like, a book they don't really respond to all that much?
Yeah.
Even if I disagree with some of her framing.
Right. No, the sentiment I understand. I don't agree that this book is very much about Trump America. I think it's very much about the moment that it was about,
it's a weird thing to, I'm grateful for the book.
Yeah.
I know I'll reread it and I'll probably like it more. And yet it left me kind of cold. But deep down I know that I am grateful that this book exists.
Yeah,
and so I don't want to take too much away from it. I do want to ever so briefly, this is something Levi and I have talked a lot about. I don't think I've talked about a lot on this podcast with regards to the plot against America. Yes. But I have a particular hobby horse that this book randomly decides to kick a hornet's nest out of for no real reason, I think, towards the end of the book. Mm-hmm. Where very casually, at the very end of the book, this is like right after FDR would have been elected in 1932 and then presumably have taken office in 1933.
I just want to also say it was so casual that I didn't even notice it, and then Kyle told me about it, and I was like, wait, when did that happen? And I had to go back and look, and I was like, oh, yeah, it did say that. Huh. Like, I was like, okay.
Where
there was a coup against FDR,
there's a coup that I think General MacArthur was like the guy who was behind, it said.
Yeah.
And now a lot of people be like, oh, so what? We're already in fantasy land with one of these books. Like, it's not trying to depict reality on a one-to-one level.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
But that was a random level of cynicism. That, going back to your question, what was your question?
Are you convinced?
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced by that. He himself was born in 1937 under the... this is going to randomly make it sound like I'm mad at him on a personal level. And I'm not. But I am confused. He was born in FDR's America. FDR's America was one of the most enriching, amazing periods of this country's history. Not without fault, but like, come on. I can't imagine being the rest of my life. If I was born in FDR's era America, I would remind everybody in my life continually that was the president who was president when I was born. And take eternal pride in that. I know that's randomly like setting him aside in this special way. But the book randomly had this cynicism about doing that well, the right-wing cabal that is in America at that time, not so different from Nazism, is it? Well, as it turned out, it was, because we went and we defeated the Nazis on the battlefield, and we proved that we were not the Nazis. Now, did Nazism in some context exist in America in the 30s through the 40s? Of course it did. There's history that shows that it did to some extent. But those were demons that America very clearly rejected. This is something that Philip Roth's book, The Plot Against America, which I've not read, also
the TV show.
Plays on this concept. The TV show was overall very well done. I liked it.
That was the COVID TV show. Was the way I
was that when that
was literally right when COVID happened. Okay. That show premiered.
I don't remember that exactly, but okay. Cynicism can very often come from very well-earned places of like, well, there were never really ever a good old day, blah, blah, But, you got to acknowledge the few times there actually were better days, or there were days that were a little more clear-eyed than were the moment we're living in right now. Sure. And to that, I know I'm really on a random place talking about this. This is something nobody talks about with this book or seem to care about with Plot Against America.
And by the way, this is not a criticism of Kyle, but he talks to me about this all the time, so now you get to hear about it.
This is a random hobby horse that I reject. I'm like, I don't understand I get it, like, you've seen through the looking glass. You worked for Lockheed Martin. You see all these things I don't see. Right. But that's just something I just reject. I'm sorry, I'm a middle school progressive who has been a Southern Baptist deacon and taught Sunday school. So I know I look at the world in a very particular way that's opposed to, in many ways, in opposition to the singular ideas that any one of those would have. But that's just a random thing that I'm like, why would you do that? Like, and is that just to thumb in the eye? I'm out, folks. That's the end of the book. Is it just like a pure shock value thing? I don't know. I'm gonna rest now. And just take it easy. I feel like I was getting worked up over that. But what do you think about any of that?
Well, that's kind of what I want to talk about the politics of the book and what I think the book is saying that I respect, but not what you're talking about. I do find to be too much. In the sense of I agree that I think I like what the book is saying at the end, but not that aspect of it. As far as that goes, I think I think when people talk about that period of American conservatism verging on this Nazism, I mean, I feel like most people in that period viewed Hitler as like a chic kind of thing to be into. I mean, he was Time Man of the Year at one point.
Multiple times.
Which Donald Trump has also been multiple times. And by the way, there's been plenty of other people who have been Time Man of the Year, so I know whatever.
There was one year you were.
I know
you were Time Man of the Year.
I wasn't expecting that one. That was like literally like saying, "Oh my God, the Big Lebowski moment came true." Where you look into the mirror of it.
Now it's the Person of the Year, politically correct.
Oh, excuse me. But anyway, what they're saying though about a lot of these things is saying about is that there was a contingent of American conservatism that a lot of people now attach to Charles Lindbergh, or even industrialists like Henry Ford, that was, very clearly fascistic individuals who would support Nazism.
You know who won Time Man of the Year the most? This person won it 3 times. Franklin Delano Roosevelt won it 1932, 1934, and 1941. The only person who's won it 3 times. Just want to say that.
So in the Hitler-Trump thing, it kind of is like, well, I don't know what any of that means. The Hitler thing is just wild to me that ever even happened. That almost sounds like a joke.
Hitler, whatever happened there.
Right. It's like, yeah. But no, my point is, I think what that kind of storytelling is, I think, trying to reflect a certain idea of, and I don't agree with, and I have a problem with this that I want to talk about, that's a little bit even different than what you're saying, that I agree with mostly with what you're saying, but is that it's trying to imagine in a reflection of, well, the Depression has now hit the United States just as it had Germany, which led to the erosion of the Weimar Republic, the erosion of all of the,
rise of Nazism,
the erosion of all the safeguards that government stops autocracy and ultimately leads to a populist vision of, we want a strong government that can definitively get us back on the world stage of this imperialist, uber-capitalist machine that we once were, which leads to people accepting Nazism and Hitler as as the spokesman of that nationalism. So obviously losing that war and going into that depression where they said, literally it was like you would take entire Reichsmarks, entire whole buckets of Reichsmarks down and it wouldn't buy anything. The levels of poverty that were, outmatched the own Great Depression was. And what I think these things are trying to do is say, what if, or say even, wow, how grateful we are that we had somebody like FDR and a government that would come in and that would make all these changes and, stop the kind of Hoover America of just, well, let's just stand back and let everything happen. Or even do a version of, let's go further and let's consolidate all of our power and our economy into these, nationalistic ends. Which, and just as well as I do, that there's been a lot of people that have now looked at history and said, well, Roosevelt's a fascist because he did this, this, and this, and he consolidated all this power in the government to do all these things that were unconstitutional, which I don't agree with, and I know you don't agree with either, which are ridiculous when you're comparing that.
Well, some of that stuff was happening even in the late 40s,
right,
so after he died.
Right, when you're comparing the creation of, Social Security to, outright pogroms and not a crystal knot and whatever, and the Holocaust and all those things. If you're going to compare those two governments in the same way, you're frankly just an idiot.
Have a clear agenda.
Right, who has an agenda that you're trying to go in these directions about American governmental policy, which are false. However, I do think the point is a mildly interesting one to say, oh, what would have happened if the right would have taken over in a more definitive way, kind of wrenched a lot of the power away from the more center-right Republicans of that moment and said, let's go in this direction. And so, however, the problem I have with that, too, is that what it says in its own way is by saying that, oh, it can happen here too. It can happen in America. One of the famous books that was ever written in that period was Sinclair Lewis's "It Can Happen Here," which was a lot about that. And that inherently, I'm just going to say it the way it is just kind of a very nationalistic and racist idea in its own right to say, well, it can happen in America. Well, yeah, it can happen anywhere. Why is America any different that we're surprised that these things can happen? You know. Now, has it happened to that degree? No, and I hope, even over the next 3 years that we have under one of the more autocratic presidents we've ever had, I'm not even going to say he's the most, because, I mean, there have been periods where, I mean, he acts like that the most, but there have been periods where there have been presidents that have exerted immense power over the nation, in good and bad ways. That I don't even think Donald Trump totally has that yet in those directions that other presidents would go. But I do believe the United States has enough safeguards where it can stop itself from going in that direction totally. However, what happens, though, is you ferment and foment a kind of dialogue, which we've definitely seen in this country, where you're having people being assassinated and on either side of the political spectrum, and that the right has made this level so high of like political discourse in such a negative vent that it's going into the populace. That's what scares me more than anything, is like the population's reaction to political event going in those directions. Because in its own way, that's what Nazism was in a more direct form, is going in that direction. When you say that here, though, with this at this time, where people are literally just trying to get by in the Great Depression on what they've got, I mean, you're coming out of a time period where, with Nazi Germany, they'd also lost a war and were a lot more, obviously the United States was racist at that time in a lot of its policy, but like was a lot more dedicatedly like, we need to expel these individuals from the nation, because they are not German enough, or they are not contributing enough, or they're stealing from us, or they're doing whatever, they come up with, whatever stupid reasons they come up with to hate them. So it's hard, like, I understand what they're trying to do with that by saying, oh, well, what if, like, these things led to this? But like you said, if you just really sit down and do the calculus comparisons of the nations themselves, it just doesn't really work in that direction, obviously. What I do like, however, about what this book is, I think, saying politically, is it is kind of trying to lionize a certain era of the left in the United States, or just outright anarchism, which kind of anarchism in a whole real sense. There's a lot about
that in Against the Day, and there's some kernels of it in Vineland.
Anarchism, in a major sense, has really disappeared from the United States as a viable political ideology, really since 1932 in a major way. I mean, you heard so much about that in, the Palmer raids in the 20s, and I mean, so much anarchism was an actual, like, I know that they made the Red Scare into a thing that was, like, a little overblown, but, like, anarchism was an actual, like, viable political ideology that existed. I mean, one of the biggest...
the fact that W.B. Du Bois garnered as much as 5% of the popular vote in some elections.
Was it Du Bois?
Not Du Bois, excuse me.
That's what I was trying to think of his name.
What's his name?
Starts with an S. No, I don't remember. Yeah, because I was like, no, that ain't his name. And even, what was... was it Emma Goldman? Was she the big anarchist?
Eugene V. Debs is what I was trying to think of.
Eugene Debs. Was it Emma Goldman was the big anarchist, I think, that was like in Reds,
Yeah, I think so.
The Emma Goldman was like, now seen as like a very leftist hero, which, I mean, anarchism is a leftist idea ultimately, but it's seen more in a socialist sense about a lot of her thoughts, but like was very much an anarchist. And so I think that this book is very much about like that very weird kind of period of the left, an extreme version of the left being like a viable political position in the United States, or at least one that was like more accepted to even be discussed in a way that is not even relevant now. Like anarchism is not even any sort of, on anybody's mind, really, in the popular sense. Yeah. And so I think that's really what this book was trying to do, was show that the definitive, rise of Nazism and the more, rise of fascism in Europe necessitated a government which could not even toy with the idea, ultimately what was a progressive leftist government, could not even toy with the idea of no government to counteract these problems, right? Because obviously, if anything, it's a very liberal government, but FDR's government is definitively non-anarchist in the sense of the creation of so many programs that would stop the Great Depression, obviously, and would eventually create a war machine that could win World War II. So I think that's really what I find interesting about the book is that it's really thinking about, it's kind of a funeral dirge for American anarchism in a major way that I don't think anybody has ever even thought about talking about in the terms of like 1932, 1933, like the end of a certain breed of the American left, which hasn't really existed since then in a major way that is taken seriously.
I think everything you just said to me is a pretty, I think, well-reasoned but charitable view of this book.
Sure.
Because
in the book it's clearly not interested in all that.
I don't think it is, and
I think
there are some conversations about Nazism between Hicks and some of his family that I think are like that's some of the best, more interesting little political tidbits of the book.
Yeah, because his father was it his father or his uncle? One of his uncle, I think, he's like pretty much just a Nazi, right? Pretty much like the way that
I think he had some sympathy for the Nazism,
yeah.
anyways. Yeah, and because this is a book that's primarily about him trying to find. Her name was Daphne Airmont, the daughter of the reclusive Al Capone of cheese, in quotes, Bruno Airmont.
I'm looking at some of these names I'd forgotten about.
Alongside Hop Wingdale, clarinetist for the swing band, the Klesmopolitans, and Daphne's paramour. And then I think, excuse me, some of that I think most like charming stuff in the book was also when he was on the ship, the ocean liner.
Yeah.
And some of the British.
Was it the SS Stupendica?
Yeah. Spies he got. And I think everything you just said is all very well reasoned and interesting. I think this book ultimately was just like not a farce in the way some of his other books were, but was just like, we'll go here and we'll go there, and this will happen and that'll happen, and
we'll end on the word skeet. Literally,
it did, yeah. And if this is his last book, that's like, the last words of his entire prose.
Like hilarious, hilarious.
But I think ultimately this book just felt like a lark. It felt like, I'll dip in, and I'll be honest, as someone who's a fan of him and really interested in the 1930s, I was a little minorly disappointed in that aspect of it. I was like, oh, okay, well, you wanted to do this. And what do you think about just in general? We can start talking about our rankings of his books here in just a second, but like this move towards like, I'm going to do these little detective books or detective stories, and those are so far seeming as though they're going to be the ellipses that concludes his career.
Well, I don't know. I mean, after you write books like Mason-Dixon and Against the Day, and I think you'd agree with what I'm going to say is like, what more do you expect him to do?
But it's like the
now,
thing
is
when you ascend the mountain
right.
so many times, you keep expecting them to go to the mountain.
Well, it's like
I'm just going to climb a hill.
This is maybe a bad comparison, but it's like what we've said about James Cameron, where you've said it's like, great, the Avatar movies are good, but like, is this what you're really going to waste the last bits of your career doing? Really? Because he's like what, 70?
He's over 70.
Yeah, so I mean, like,
presumably in good health, but we know that's never a guarantee for anything,
right? And then we don't know how long this is going to go on for making movies, and I mean, a similar thing here. It's like, why are you quote unquote wasting time?
Talk too much about this, but I have heard the 4th and 5th are going to be pretty different compared to what 2 and 3 were.
Well, I heard it was like even on the table of even making the movies, depending on the box office for this movie.
Yeah, I've heard that, and I'm thinking, and he might be saying that as a negotiating tactic publicly with Disney to get the money and the time he wants to finish it.
I think I've also heard that they've shot a lot of the 4th movie too. So I'm like,
I think it's just the effects work needs to be, which is I guess the whole of the movie.
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of like literally what the movie is.
Yeah.
No, but and I think you're right with going back to Shadow Ticket. I think you're right I think that is a charitable reading, everything I said, because I think the book is also very interested in other things. I do feel like, though, there's that really great piece of prose towards the end where it talks about an almost like Statue of Liberty-esque figure in the ocean. And it was particularly that section that I felt like this is like a memorial to something.
Yeah.
He's memorializing something here. I don't know what it is. And then I kept thinking about it. I was like, well, it has to be that.
Yeah.
Another section of the book I really love where it was talking about how Hicks used to be a strikebreaker and he basically straight up was going to kill a guy.
Yeah.
And something happened to stop him from literally killing a person. Like some supernatural event happened where he didn't do it, or he swung and it missed. And then him thinking about what does that mean. I really love that whole section of the book, and I wish there would have been more about that. See, that's the thing that's unfortunate about this book is it's playing with so much house money of interesting things, and then it's like, oh, but whatever.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, okay, well, I kind of thought that was interesting over there.
Yeah.
Why don't we go back over there? Oh, no, we're doing this. I love the Squisita Thickly stuff. I think that is, first of all, also maybe the greatest Pynchon name. Maybe the best. He's obsessed with Shirley Temple, by the way. It's kind of weird.
I remember there was a lot of stuff in Gravity's Rainbow.
Oh, my goodness. I said that, yeah. And there's been other times where that stuff's been brought up here and there, but the Squisita Thickly stuff I thought was very interesting because that was the idea of these really gross, over-the-top food expose movies that were like Shirley Temple, but what if she eats a lot?
And they were made in the Depression when
where people didn't have food.
See, that's a really rich idea, and it's like, okay, let's stay here for a little bit. That's kind of like the Infinite Jest aspect of Infinite Jest, where it's about a movie that literally drives people insane, kind of as a terrorist act. It's a similar thing with that, where it's there's something there. The movie's the book rather is full of a lot of great ideas. But it's just And then it's got stuff talking about shoe sizes, but his size is triple E, talking about the shores of Tripoli and the song about the Marines, and stuff like that. And I say this with all respect to him. I wonder if a book like this comes about because he's so brilliant, obviously. But he's I'm just going to work through this idea. I'm going to toss this one as a way is a mental exercise kind of thing. I wonder if it's is that what this is
well, clearly that's what he's been doing the last so many years, I think, especially since Inherent Vice, is even though these books are seen as these potbowlers, which they are, they're also just well, let's see what Pynchon's thinking about today. It's kind of obviously, I think, Bleeding Edge was written at the right time where it was really thinking about, kind of at the end of the Obama presidency, thinking about...
It was in the middle of it, I guess, right?
Well, 2014.
Oh, is it 14?
Yeah, it was towards the end. When he was writing it would have been in the middle. He would have been writing it, I guess, after his first term. But just thinking about, or however long he was writing that book, I don't know. But basically just thinking, what was the dot-com boom? How has New York changed? What was 9/11? And
it had to be one of the shortest distances between books as far as in this modern era was between Inherent Vice and Bleeding Edge, I would think.
Yeah, because then it was 12 years between Bleeding Edge and this. Actually, it was 2013. I'm sorry, not 2014. Excuse me. It just feels like a book that's about a lot of things, but not really about anything. And like I said, I think all that stuff I said about the politics of the book are ultimately a major part of the book, but I don't think that's what the book is mainly is. I think he's also really interested in, and we can kind of talk about this, I guess, with Gravity's Rainbow, but this book reminds me a lot of that book in the sense of it just really falls apart by the end as far as the through line.
Yeah.
Becomes very what am I reading anymore?
Yeah.
Now this is a way easier to understand version of that. I feel like there's sections of Gravity's Rainbow I have no recollection of, literally because I'm I don't even know what was going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so yeah, ultimately it's a.
So if this ends up being his last books, I'm glad that he wrote it. But and it's something I'm going to revisit. But
yeah,
we'll see. I guess now we'll go to the last part of this. We're going to talk about.
We don't have to spend forever on these either.
Our top 9, because there's 9, and there's also we should just at least mention this Slow Learner, which is his. It's like a little short story collection. They were previously published. The most interesting thing I think about this book is the introduction. This book came out in 1984, by the way. So this was like almost in the middle of where Gravity's Rainbow was and Vineland was.
Right.
I think the most fascinating thing about it is this is the closest we ever get to his reflection on his own work.
Yeah.
So that in of itself makes it an important thing to read, I would say. The stories themselves are good.
Yeah. I do want to say I really love the story. I think it was The Secret Integration, which was the one about all those friends going to that haunted house or whatever. I really love that book. Or that story. I think that's really good. So I did want to mention that. But anyway.
All right, Levi. How do you want to do this? So we want to take turns going through these, or will you do your 9, I'll do my 9? Or what do you want to do?
I don't know. Because I guess if we go back and forth, we're going to be going back over some of the same
you do all yours, and then I'll do mine. How's that sound?
Do you want to go backwards?
Yeah, we'll do that.
So Shadow Ticket is my number 9, and we already talked about that. Bleeding Edge is after that at number 8. I do want to talk a little bit about that, but maybe we can... How do you want to do it? You want to talk about them each and go back and forth and you say something, or you want me to say something and then we just... How you want to do it? We should talk about this beforehand, but oh well.
Why don't you say your piece about it and then
you can say yours, I guess. Okay. When you go through.
Yeah.
Okay. Bleeding Edge, we've kind of talked about that book a little bit, but it was my first time reading it. I really liked parts of that. I liked that it was in the more modern day, obviously, and that it was about a lot of things that were about my childhood. A little bit preceding that. While I was born when the book was...
But there's a mention of Space Ghost Coast to Coast, and you're like,
right.
Okay, so Thomas Pynchon
was watching
is
TV.
Aware of that and
Dragon
has
Ball
seen
Z
some of it.
and,
Yeah.
There's plenty of stuff in that, and about there's a lot of points in the book where it says, as Britney says, and it's talking about Britney Spears.
Yeah.
That's hilarious to me. So I think that book's good. I think it's also very confusing to me what it's actually saying about the era of itself. It's obviously understand what it's saying about the internet, which is something he's kind of been saying for forever anyway. Especially with Inherent Vice, there was a lot of stuff about the internet and that. So that all made sense to me about the internet intrigue. But when it brings the 9/11 stuff into it, I'm very confused about what that's actually trying to say happened about, was it this major conspiracy? It seems like it's implying it was. More in a business. Seems like that's more of a business kind of conspiracy than political or economic. But my number 7 is Crying a Lot 49. That's actually the book I've read the most other than Inherent Vice. I've read that book 3 times. The Crying a Lot 49. He has a very low opinion on this book. And I like it.
You said something
overall.
about it in Slow Learner.
Right, and I like it overall. I think that it's a really good primer for his books. That or Inherent Vice, obviously. I think that it's very short. It's very quick. I think I love the idea of the book. Literally, the whole plot is I'm going to put you in charge of my estate when I die. And oh, by the way, there's all this male conspiracy, and it's wait, what? And you're and then she goes into all that, and that there's a lot of stuff in it about the Beatles that I think is kind of funny. So
that's also his 60s book that is at the time period.
Yes, because V is all over the place. So yeah, I like Crying a Lot 49 quite a bit. Speaking of that. Number 6 for me is V. That's a book I probably remember very little about in general. It's the one I remember the least because I read it once and it was some years ago.
It also has a structure. It's going back and forth. Between
so that felt a lot like when I read Slow Learner. I know there were aspects of that were, I think, reused in V. I think certain things that he wrote before that in short story form. So that book reminded me a lot of V. There's some stuff in that book, though, that I still laugh about. All the stuff in the whole sick crew. That's a phrase we use all the time. specifically the part where it's talking about King Kong, the well-known ape.
Yeah.
It's like that just kills me. I thought that was interesting too because that's kind of another kind of semi-autobiographical stuff because it's a lot about the Navy, which he was in the Navy, and so that stuff. That's another actual kind of famous photograph of him was when he went in the Navy. That is a known photograph.
A well-known photograph.
Yeah, well-known photograph of the well-known ape. See, I like V. I mean, I feel like that's actually really like in a lot of ways, probably that or Gravity's Rainbow is actually the like distillation of what his whole oeuvre is really about. Is about people searching for something, and the whole point of V is about people who search for this thing rather than just live their own life. And like how obsessions kind of drive your own life rather than you just like living your life is, I don't know, I think that's an interesting idea. After that, Against the Days, number 5. You like this book a lot more than me, so I'll let you talk a lot more about it. I read that not this summer, but the summer before, and it took me forever to get through. So I felt like I wasn't as charitable towards that book as I should have been because I should have been more dedicated to reading it. But I remember that was when we went to Gettysburg on our trip that we took together, and I was still reading it there. A really ambitious book. I love what it is and what it's about, and I love that it's his Western book. Like those were the sections I wanted to read the most, was the stuff that was about the Westerns. As far as the stuff in Europe, I was kind of like, oh, I've been there, done that. Like, you've done Europe a million times, like, or versions of it, with V, or even parts of Crying Lot 49 it reminded me of, with the, like, opera stuff. So, there was some of that in Mason and Dixon, too, and Gravity's Rainbow, obviously. So, ultimately, I like the book a lot. I love what it is more than what it was like to read it, I guess.
That's fair.
Gravity's Rainbow is 4. Like I was saying earlier, that's a book that I still think a lot about and that I really want to reread. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this, but I have a creative project that is a lot about Gravity's Rainbow and what it must have been like to write Gravity's Rainbow, so I'll probably have a lot more to say about Gravity's Rainbow in the future eventually, but
you read it once?
I read it once back in 2019, December of 2019, and right into 2020. I made an effort to read that book. I don't have the reading schedule like I used to, but that was one I stuck to because I was like, I've got to get through this book. Like, I can't let this book get away from me. So I read it pretty quick for what I would read a book now. That's one of those books. It's a lot like Moby Dick. A lot of people compared it to that in the sense of that it's like some of the best prose you've ever read, and then some stuff that's like, wow, I want to stop reading it. Like, this is getting boring. So it's a very uneven book, and it's one of those books where it's like impressive if you've read it, but also there was this one, I think I sent it to you, this one video of this guy, like, how to read. It was like Gravity's Rainbow, Infinite Jest, and something else. He's like, how to read these books. You open the page and you read the words. He's like, it's like, really follow this. Like, it was making fun of like people who were like, how do you do this? Yeah. It's like, you just read the book. I don't know, like, that book, I was in college when I read it, and it felt like a college act.
Giving your college try.
Yeah. So I really do love that book, though, in the sense of that, wow, I read that, and there's some things I think are very memorable about it that I still think about. I think the ending of that book is really masterful. Because that's what I think people are kind of losing the point about the book when they're focusing too much on the plot, which I did too. I was focused on the plot while I was reading it, trying to figure it out. But once you get to the end and you're like still focused on, well, wait, what happened? It's like, that's just not the point of what this is doing. It's literally deconstructing itself, which is kind of eye roll worthy. But when you write like him, it's like, whatever, Vineland is my number 3. We've talked quite a bit about that, and you'll say even more about it. But Vineland, I feel like that's his book that is maybe actually his book his primer book, I would give a lot of people. I'd say if you like,
especially now since One Battle After Another
yes,
exists,
right.
then that can be an entry point
to
of
just
sorts
say,
to-
hey, read this book.
My wife
because-
recently read this and quite liked it.
She did the audiobook, right? She finished it. Okay, good.
She liked it.
Was she happy about Mr. Vaughn's demise?
Yeah,
The
we had
names.
we had a lot of conversations about the Fernesi versus Perfidia
Yes.
characterizations. Like, she really didn't like Fernesi in the book. And anyways, we had but anyways, she liked it.
Yeah, well, good. But yeah, Vineland is. I really love big sections of that book, like the stuff where Fernesi is first really in it with that. Oh God, I can't remember his name. The guy that she's married to.
Her second family, basically.
Right, and all that stuff, and where she goes to get that check cashed, and basically they've like cut her out of the, they like deleted her file or whatever. I love all that. That's just really well written. It's great to have a vision of like the way that Pynchon, especially at that time, viewed like supermarkets and like consumer America.
It's kind of his own little version of white noise.
Right. It's short, that section, and I mean there's versions of that throughout, but I also really love all the stuff talking about the affair and them going to the motels and like talking about it's like a Midwestern storm parts of it, or like wherever they are, it's like Oklahoma or something. And that section where it talks about that big place where they've got Fernesi and she tries to go get her out, and there's like that weird secret highway where they've got all these like markers to these like basically John Birch Society types who are like all these like right-wing people who have died in the Call of Duty or whatever. I think that was interesting. That felt like some Christmas adventurer stuff in this. So yeah, I love Vineland. It's great. You'll say a lot more about it than me, but Mason and Dixon. In a lot of ways, this is kind of really, in a certain way, my favorite of his books because this is number 2. I love everything about what this book is. I love that it's about American Revolutionary America, obviously. American Revolutionary America.
Well, also specifically pre-revolutionary.
Right.
It's kind of like
I'm
right
just thinking
before.
about how I said that.
Yeah.
And then after some, yeah. And, what I love about this book, too, is that it is actually really easy to read.
Yeah.
It looks really complicated, but then you actually sit down and you're reading it and you're like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense. Like, and I think what I love about that book is it was him writing a book of romanticism, and his try that, and it actually feels that way. Like, it doesn't feel very cynical.
Yeah.
Even though it has a lot of ideas, and I mean, and there's a lot of autocracy in that book, talking about the Jesuits and groups that wanted to colonize America in various ways. And I love the sections at the end of that book where they're talking about going. That's where that book kind of breaks down, is when they're seeing how far they can go.
Yeah.
West, and talking about Native Americans there and the land. And so it's a very American book that I really love, and is one of his funnier books too. And I think his most moral, is explicitly moral book as far as about like a literal argumentation that's going on between Mason and Dixon about like, well, what about this or what about that, or how do you feel about that, or these different views. And I mean, especially the stuff about Dixon's anger over slavery in South Africa, and how Mason kind of just like, whatever, you get involved in that, I guess. Like, and how he's like, well, why don't you care more about that? I think all that's pretty great and interesting. I was very unhappy when I realized that the name Vroom is apparently an actual like name, a European name. So I was kind of mad that Cornelius Vroom couldn't be my favorite Pynchon name anymore because it's actually real. So, and then of course number 1's Inherent Vice. I've talked ad nauseum about that. I'll just say here that it's the book that got me interested in reading in a serious way. So even though I feel like there are better books that he's written, it's the book that I have the most kinship with, and I think is just a great genre novel that is like actually about things and actually really well written. So that's me.
All right, I'll go through my list here real quick. Number 9, Bleeding Edge. I think the single biggest thing about this is the book I just think about the least out of all of his books. I just don't think about it all that much. I think there has been more written about people being a little bit disappointed with Don DeLillo's 9/11 book, Falling Man.
Yeah, which is a great book, by the way.
I think is really good. I think that's actually one of my favorite DeLillo books.
It is a great book. I don't really see what people are negative about that one.
Anyways, I think because just talk about that for a second, DeLillo was somebody who was always circling a lot of concepts that felt like it now in retrospect feel like it was either predicting or about terrorism or 9/11 in some way, and then it happened. Right. I mean, obviously the cover of Underworld iconically has the Twin Towers forever.
Interestingly, that book is not as much about terrorism as his other books are. Mao 2 is way more about that.
No, not really. But anyways, there's been a lot of stuff, and he's even more specifically a New York writer than Pynchon is. And so I think there was a random amount of disappointment actually in that, which I think is ill-served because I think that's a really pretty great book. I don't think that's as much associated with Pynchon, and it maybe weirdly should be in terms of his own take on 9/11. Seems a little milquetoast and uninteresting, and
also that it's unsure what it has to say.
Yeah, and I think the thing about DeLillo is DeLillo wrote a lot about ideas, obviously, but there's a lot more emotion and characterization and depth in some of his books than you get with Pynchon's books.
Falling Man is a lot more about the visceral feeling of
it's not in any way about any kind of conspiracy.
It's not really
or anything.
Interested in that.
Now, he has written about conspiratorial things in his books in general.
Well, and even that, though, I feel like what's so genius about DeLillo is even when he writes that way, he's writing about the tangible aspects of that, what that actually is.
Anyways, that might seem like a random thing to bring up with this, but I think that's Bleeding important. Edge just feels like I don't think about it all that much. It will be the book of his, of course, I'll reread, but I'll probably last reread before I reread all the other ones, so it's fine.
I just want to say it's interesting you said, but I just read that book this year. It's the one I keep thinking about because I'm like, in kind of a good way, what's the mystery of this book? I'm still trying to figure it out, but I agree, it's a non-essential.
Number 8, The Crying of Lot 49, I think is plenty good. I actually would like to reread it, but it just feels like the least going on narratively out of all his books. More, not even as a criticism of that, just in comparison to all the other work he's done. So it's fine. It's actually even better than Shadow Ticket, which is my number 7. But I think there is, for all my criticism I said about Shadow Ticket, there is this I'm getting to go through the 1930s on a literary level.
You enjoy the reading aspect of it more than The Crown of Lot 49.
Even though I think probably The Crown of Lot 49 is certainly a better book. But Shadow Ticket at least has that, I'm in the 30s ephemera.
Yeah, sure.
That I like. Number 6, and it's tough that it has to end up here. It's just by virtue of the list, is V. That's the one I actually want to reread the most right now.
I have to. I've been thinking a lot about it.
I'm probably going to do it sometime in the first half of this coming year. Because I'm going to just slowly start going through his books again. Not necessarily in a concerted, I'm going to do in a row, but just slowly going through them. And so that's the one I most want to reread. And so I really liked it. I think it is probably an alienating book to start with because of the bifurcated nature of the narrative.
A lot of people talk about that. It's very Gravity's Rainbow-esque. I feel like it's easier to understand than Gravity's Rainbow by a lot, but it's a weird book though. I mean, you got to pay attention to it in the sense that it's not like even some of his other books where you can kind of be like, oh, this is fun and whatever. You're kind of like, what is this exactly? So,
so I quite like it. I've been wanting to reread it, and I will soon. Number 5, and this might seem absurd, is Gravity's Rainbow. It's a book I have a great deal of respect for. You read it before me, but then I read it just as COVID was really getting kicked off, and I literally remember thinking what are those books I haven't read yet? Yeah. Who knows what the hell? I think all the time about what were we really thinking during COVID, by the way, that's now we're on the other side of it. Oh, we got through it, but at the time, I think back now, I'm like, did we all think the world was going to end, or what was how do we get through the day-to-day of that? Sometimes I'm a little mystified. But anyways, I was like, okay, Gravity's Rainbow, I need to sit down and read this. Quite liked it. As you said, kind of uneven, But the highs of that book are very high, and
Yeah, I remember when you were reading it, you would read in the living room, and I would walk in every day and be like, "What's going on?" Now?
Yeah.
Like, just laugh about it.
so I quite like it.
Yeah.
We'll get around to it again eventually. Number 4, I've got Inherent Vice. That is I've read, that's one I've reread. I've read that twice, and I think Levi's observation about like finding free love in a world and environment where love is not all that respected is actually a really great idea that he draws out.
Love,
yeah,
mean,
right.
Okay.
And again, this is always going to be spiritually among the more important books because it was the first one of his I read, and it had the connection to Paul Thomas Anderson and that forthcoming movie at that time. A movie that is fairly accurate to the book, and so that in of itself is going to be a valuable thing, I think, for future fans to eventually fall into his work with. We talked about Inherent Vice more in depth on that other episode, just to point out again. Number 3, and this is one that could honestly one day be my number 1, I want to read again, is Against the Day. The accomplishment of that book, to me, is very underrated. The Vulture article, the New York Magazine article that was an attempt to like be a biography of him, very smugly and flippantly just mentioned this book in passing. Like, oh, it's just like, I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was something like, is this overlong critique of capitalism or something along those lines. And I thought that was a very smug characterization of that book. It's his closest thing to he's written to science fiction or fantasy, which I think is very important and very fascinating. And his taking of the real world and kind of showing there, to use a Stranger Things term, there's an upside down world to that's existing on top of our own or underneath our own. I just thought it was wildly imaginative. It's a book that is weird. It's very actually, I think the biggest challenge of the book is the length of it. And what I mean by that is, I remember I read it, I think it was over the Christmas break of 2020, I believe. Yeah, I think that's when it was. So I remember reading Vineland in the summer of 2020. And I just remember that was just like, to me, I still am nostalgic for, I wish I could find another Christmas break book like that, because it was, to me, just this perfect, beautiful, amazing accomplishment that I just so loved. And I think weirdly has the most juice to maybe be adapted one day. So I'd love to see that.
Yeah, just to be clear, he said, after that came Against the Day, a big and messy novelistic attack on capitalism, written by an author increasingly at peace with its comforts.
See, like, that says nothing about the book and is a very, like, smug, quick thing. I know there's, I went back and reread it a few times. There's a kind of critical New Yorker review of that at the time, which is also praising some things about it, but also saying it's too long or whatever. This is his longest book, it should be said. I think the chief challenge of it is the length in terms of like just remembering all the characters. But like sentence to sentence, it's actually fairly
it's actually very easy to read. It's just, it gets kind of...
And there's so many characters and threads, and you're like, what's this?
Well, I think it's like literally 1172 or something. It's like a long book. I mean, it took forever for me to read it.
Yeah.
And I was liking it, but... I don't know. There's something about it in its own way that it kind of... There's a lot of shadow ticket stuff I see in that book, too. Not in a bad way, necessarily. Or there's a lot of Against the Day I see in shadow ticket, I should say. And just as far as that version of anarchism, too, which I'm interested in that, but it just... It's a revenge novel, which is a little different for me. I mean, it's a lot of different things, but...
like I said, I think I could see it being this really amazing TV show.
I think that would be I think that'd be a great idea to do that.
So Against the Day. Number 3, it could even go higher one day. Number 2 is Vineland. That's all. I've reread this one. And I think in particular what I really love about that one is it's like a 1990 look at 1984 looking back at the 60s. Mm-hmm. It's like it's through multiple lenses of reflection that I think he's kind of... You were talking about Shadow Ticket being kind of like a reflection or a dirge of a certain era or time period, and I feel like that's what he's doing with
Vineland. Yeah.
Like that a lot. My number one's Mason and Dixon. Going back to what I was saying earlier, similarly with Against the Day, like as somebody who's not really predisposed to fantasy exactly, feeling as though I'm falling into his little fantasy-esque, less so with this than Against the Day,
right.
but take on pre-colonial era America and
and
rubbing shoulders with George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and also like it's a story within stories, and it's like a book about storytelling.
Yeah, that's right. And I was going to say it's like got a frame narrative in and of itself, which is like a storybook.
Which everybody says this Pynchon name, that Pynchon name. There's a lot of Pynchon names. Reverend Wick's Cherry Coke will forever be my favorite Pynchon name.
It's a good one.
Just by like you're literally in the 18th century and you're naming somebody's last name Cherry Coke. I'm never not going to love that. So
that book has a lot of really funny jokes in it too, like the smoke but do not inhale.
Yeah,
like,
right.
Bill Clinton.
And then there's stuff about like there's one point it basically says live long and prosper in a slightly altered way, and then immediately describes the Vulcan salute. It does not say the Vulcan salute, but it describes what the person's doing. That's what it is. There's a lot of
Native Americans they said did that, or something.
I think maybe, but there's like he's clearly a Trekker or Trek person because there's every once in a while Trek stuff's peppered throughout his stuff. Also, it was Mason whose wife died, right? Rebecca was her name. Mm-hmm. Some of the, just like her as a ghost kind of haunting the book. I think about some of those passages all the time. This is the one I most want to reread.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to do that sometime soonish. But anyways, I remember I read this in the fall.
We read it together.
Oh, was that 21?
No, it was 2020. We started reading it in August.
2020. Okay.
No, actually we started reading it in July. I think we finished it in September.
Okay. So I really have a lot.
You were a little. I got a little bit behind on it, and you read it before.
An affinity for that, and there's this really amazing paragraph description of what it means to turn 29 years old. I think I have this as. I randomly put this up on my 29th birthday. I think it was. Just give me a second. I'll find it. Because I think it's just like, some of the passages of his books to reread, as amazing as they are, can feel a little removed and arcane because they're just obviously from a very particular, thing or moment in the books. Here it is. 29's fell shadow. Oh, inhospitably final year of any pretense to youth, its dreams now how withered away. Though styled a prime, thou biddest thou adieu to the prime of life. There in the Stygian mists of futurity, loometh the dread 30, transition unspeakable. Prime so soon fallen, thy virtue so easily broken into a number divisible, penetrable by 6 others. 4 decade of life, thy gates but a brief year ahead, though in thy place a year can seem a century. What holdest thou for the supernaturating? And again, as it would be said, that book was kind of largely written, at least stylistically, in 18th century diction. Yeah. Pearl after pearl in that book is just amazing and beautiful. And
I remember my section I chose for the Instagram post was about America and kind of the visions people have of America and like as a living thing, and I thought that was great. Yours was about, I think, his wife.
Yeah, I'm going to find that really quickly since I went ahead and read that one portion. Let's see. Really quickly. Don't go anywhere, please. Please just stay. Let's see.
It'd be kind of interesting if you left at this point,
Okay, here we go. He prays to see her face in the new comet each night, this time in terror of not seeing it. He tries to will it there, yet is amazed that for some minutes now he cannot even remember her face. Yet at last arrives a clear night of seeing, so clear in fact that sometime after midnight, supine in the starlight, rigid with fear, Mason experiences a curious optical readjustment. The stars no longer spread upon the domed surface. He now beholds them in the third dimension as well, the eye catching its own z-axis, along with the star-choked depths near and far, rush both inward and away, and soon, quite soon, billowing out of control. He collects that the heavenly dome has been put there as protection in an agreement among observers to report only what is safe to see. 15 years in the business, and here is his initiation.
Very nice. And now I'll read.
Let me just say really quickly before you read yours.
Mm-hmm.
That is, to me, if at least in his imagination, an acknowledgement of the divine, which I find to be very important as somebody who's a fan of him, that he, at least in some way, acknowledged the heavens in that way.
Yeah.
But anyways, all right, Levi, yours.
This is, yes, from some section talking about America as a dream. Does Britannia, when she sleeps, dream? Is America her dream, in which all that cannot pass in the metropolitan wakefulness is allowed expression away in the restless slumber of these provinces, and on westward, wherever 'tis not yet mapped, nor written down, nor ever by the majority of mankind seen, serving as a very rubbish tip for subjunctive hopes, for all that may yet be true, earthly paradise, fountain of youth, realms of Prester John, Christ's kingdom, ever behind the sunset, safe till next territory of the west, be seen and recorded, measured and tied in, back into the network of points already known, that slowly triangulated its way into the continent, changing all from subjunctive to declarative, reducing possibilities to simplicities that serve the ends of governments, winning away from the realm of the sacred its borderlands one by one, and assuming them into the bare mortal world that is our home and our despair.
I don't think it would have been fair to have a book about author if we didn't have some kind of reading in it. So I'm glad that we both found some stuff.
This
to read from
Pynchon
him.
guy, keep an eye on him.
Yeah.
It's funny you say that at what's probably the end of his career.
There is a long gestating rumor that he's written a Civil War book. I don't know if this is true or not. It may never happen, but would you want to hear what he has to say about the Civil War?
No, I'm not interested in whatsoever. No, I'm just kidding. That's an insane statement, but yeah.
So, Tommy, if you're listening, we love you.
Thomas Ruggles Pynchon Jr., this has been the year of the Ruggles. We're quite a fan.
Yeah.
So
many more years to come.
Yes.
So that'll do it for this episode of Ticket Stubs. We'll be back soon with our episode on Bunny Lake is Missing and the girl with the dragon tattoo. This is Kyle.
This is Levi.
Take care, God bless, and have a very happy New Year.
If you're driving south from LA International, it should take no more than a hit or two off of your favorite brand of cigarette before you're right here in Gordita Beach, California. Well, no, actually this used to be the beach. Later on, all this is going to go high rise, high rent, high intensity. But right now, back in 1970, what it is just high. An ounce of Mexican commercial should run you no more than $10, and that's with the seeds and stems, of course. The neighbors here run mostly to surfers and dopers and stewardesses, or more correctly, I guess, steward I. Live in Gordita because it's close to the airport, and tend to hang out between flights in the bars up and down the street. So pretty much every night here is party night. Oh, my name's Doc, and I'm a private gumshoe. Nowadays, more like gum sandal. I used to work the traditional Hollywood type of PI gig, setting up drug busts for parties and divorce cases, or helping the cops out with their many shakedown schemes and so forth. But since I moved out here to the beach, I've been more into the smaller tickets. Less karmic hassle, less guilt-tripping, which doesn't bring in that much money, sometimes none at all. Sometimes it's even me that ends up paying the tab, whether it's in cash or something heavier. And that's, it's groovy. Or I guess it was groovy. Till one night my ex-old lady shows up with a story about her boyfriend, or actually older guy friend, and his wife, her boyfriend. At that point it gets sort of peculiar. maybe you'll just want to read the book, Inherent Vice, Penguin Press, $27.95. $27.95? Really? That used to be like 3 weeks of groceries, man. What year is this again?
Thank you very much. So nice. Goodbye.